Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash saved Lusamine and her reward was giving him Lillie and herself as wives. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, An indecent proposal. The air did not move. It was a solid thing, thick with the cloying sweetness of ozone and the scent of shattered crystal. Every surface in this non-world of spiraling, pearlescent structures and chitinous, black rock was sharp. The light was wrong, a nauseating violet green that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the space, casting no true shadows, only deeper shades of wrongness. It was a dimension actively hostile to the concept of life, and at its heart, a battle raged that defied all natural law. Pikachu was a blur of electric gold, a living thunderbolt arcing between crystalline spars. His small body was a conduit for an impossible amount of power, each thunderbolt not a wild spray of energy but a focused lance that shattered the ink-black tentacles lashing out from the central mass. He moved with a precision born of 1,000 battles, his cries sharp and clear orders in the suffocating silence. Pikachu, left flank. Break the cluster. Ash's voice cut through the alien hum, devoid of panic. It was the voice of a commander, sharp and absolute. He stood braced on the back of a lion forged from a dying star, his hand resting on the shimmering, nebular mane of Solgaleo. The legendary Pokémon was a bulwark of reality in this twisted place, its immense psychic and solar energies warping the space around them, creating a small pocket of breathable, sane physics. Their target was a nightmare-given form. The creature, the mother beast, as the Ether Foundation's panicked researchers had called it, was a fusion of a dozen Nihilego, a pulsating, gelatinous mountain of glass and venom. Tentacles, some as thick as trees and others as fine as needles, writhed from its core, lashing out with blinding speed. But its most horrific feature was the figure suspended within its translucent central bell, Lusamine. Her platinum blonde hair floated around her as if she were underwater, her eyes open and staring but seeing nothing. Her body was interwoven with the creature's own substance, dark veins of Nihilego's neurotoxin visibly pulsing beneath her skin, making her a part of the hive mind, its queen and its prisoner. The sight sent a cold, hard knot of fury through Ash's chest. He had seen people controlled before, but this was a violation, an absorption of the soul. Solgaleo, now. Sunsteel strike. There was no roar of defiance, only a silent, incandescent flare of power. Solgaleo's body became a meteor of pure, white-hot solar energy. It didn't just move forward, it punched a hole through the very geometry of the space, crashing into the mother beast's flank with the force of an extinction event. The impact sent a shockwave of light and screaming crystal through the dimension. The creature convulsed, its hold on Lusamine flickering as its collective consciousness reeled from the blow. That was the opening. Pikachu, cover me. Ash vaulted from Solgaleo's back, his boots finding purchase on a newly formed ledge of scorched crystal. He didn't wait for an answer. He knew Pikachu would obey. He sprinted, his movements economical and swift, a dark shape against the blinding chaos. Tentacles whipped toward him, energized by the beast's pain. A whip crack of electricity intercepted the first. An iron tail, glowing like forged steel, batted away two more. Ash reached the pulsating bell. The surface was warm, yielding like flesh but with the tensile strength of tempered glass. He could see Lusamine just inches away, her expression blank, a puppet on poison strings. He drew back his fist. It glowed with a faint, blue light, a flicker of aura he had long since learned to command not as a weapon, but as an extension of his will. He didn't punch the bell. He placed his palm flat against it. Let her go. He pushed. Not with muscle, but with intent. The blue aura flared, a silent declaration of war against the alien consciousness. It was not an attack the mother beast understood. It was used to physical force, to energy blasts. This was an invasion of a different kind. For a split second, the blankness in Lusamine's eyes cleared. A flicker of her own iron will, buried deep beneath the venom, resonated with his. The mother beast shrieked, a sound that was both psychic and physical, a grating of crystal on bone. The bell around Lusamine began to crack, not from force, but because two wills were now pushing against it from opposite directions. "Glad Ion said you were strong," Ash said, his voice low, his eyes locked on the woman trapped inside. "Prove it." Another flicker. A memory. Lillie's terrified face. Gladion's desperate plea. The ghost of Lusamine's own ambition. It was enough. With a final, agonizing groan, the crystalline prison shattered. Ash caught her as she fell, her body limp and unnervingly cold. The instant she was free, the mother beast's collective rage focused entirely on them. The entire dimension seemed to contract, every remaining tentacle and shard of its being hurtling toward the man who had stolen its queen. "Salgaleo!" Ash yelled, shielding Lusamine's body with his own. The world dissolved into white light. Salgaleo had teleported directly to them, its body a living shield. The beast's attack crashed against the legendary's flank, a tidal wave of impotent rage. In the same instant, a shimmering rift tore open behind them, the ultra wormhole, their only way home. Pikachu, his duty done, leaped from a high ledge, landing perfectly on Ash's shoulder, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Get us out of here," Ash commanded, his arm tight around Lusamine's waist. Salgaleo plunged into the swirling vortex of light and color. The transition was a violent, sensory assault. Colors bled into sounds, gravity became a suggestion, and the concept of time stretched and snapped like a rubber band. It was a chaotic, but familiar, ride. Then, for a single, stomach-dropping heartbeat, it wasn't. The tunnel of light vanished. For a fraction of a second, there was nothing. No stars, no light, no color. Just an infinite, silent, absolute blackness that felt so profoundly cold it seemed to leach the warmth from his very soul. With the cold came a wave of pure, unadulterated apathy. A feeling of utter pointlessness. Why bother? It all ends. It all fades. Let go. Pika. Pikachu's small, worried squeak cut through the feeling. The bond between them, a cord of unwavering loyalty forged over a decade, was an anchor in the sudden sea of nothing. Ash shook his head, the sensation vanishing as quickly as it had come. The wormhole reappeared, its brilliant light almost comforting now. Salgaleo let out a low, uneasy hum, the psychic equivalent of a shudder. It had felt it too. The blackness was gone. But the memory of its cold, empty touch lingered. They erupted back into reality above the altar of the sun. The warm, humid air of Alola, rich with the scent of salt and hibiscus, was a shocking contrast to the sterile void they had left. The sun was high and bright, the sky a perfect, cloudless blue. Below them, Lillie and Gladion stood waiting, their faces etched with a desperate hope that felt achingly fragile. Salgaleo descended, its paws touching the ancient stone with a reverence that belied its cosmic power. Ash slid off its back, still supporting the dead weight of Lusamine. "Mother!" Lillie's voice was a choked cry. She ran forward, her Vulpix, snowy, scrambling at her heels. She stopped just short of them, her hands hovering, afraid to touch the vacant-looking woman in Ash's arms. Gladion was at his side in a flash, his usual stoic mask cracked wide open. He took his mother's other arm, his grip surprisingly gentle. "Is she?" "She's alive," Ash said, his voice rough. "The poison is still in her system. She needs help. Now." Gladion nodded, his gaze flicking from his mother's face to Ash's, a complex storm of gratitude, awe, and something unreadable swirling in his green eyes. "The Foundation's medical team is on standby at Ether Paradise. Wick has the anti-venom prepped." With a shared, unspoken agreement, they guided Lusamine toward the waiting Ether Foundation helicopter, its blades already whipping the air into a frenzy. As Lillie hurried alongside them, her eyes, wide and filled with tears, met Ash's. She mouthed a silent "thank you," a sentiment so profound it seemed to weigh more than any words she could have spoken. Ash just gave a short, sharp nod. The rescue was over. The thanks could wait. He had a feeling the real battle had just begun. Ether Paradise was an exercise in forced perfection. The gleaming white walls, the perfectly manicured gardens under the artificial sun, the quiet hum of advanced technology, it was all designed to project an image of a flawless, controlled utopia. Today, that facade was paper-thin. Staff members moved with a hurried, anxious energy, their usual serene smiles replaced by tight-lipped concern. Lusamine had been rushed to the private medical wing in the mansion's sublevels. The heavy blast door slid shut, sealing her away with Wick and a team of specialists. It left Ash, Lillie, and Glad Ion standing in the stark white corridor, the silence ringing in their ears. Lillie was trembling, her arms wrapped tightly around her midsection. The adrenaline of the reunion had faded, leaving behind a raw, shaking terror. Will she be okay? The way she looked, she didn't even see me. Wick knows what she's doing, Glad Ion said, though his own voice lacked conviction. He paced the length of the corridor, his hand clenching and unclenching at his side. He looked like a caged Lycanroc, bristling with an energy that had no outlet. He stopped and turned to face Ash, who was leaning against the opposite wall, his arms crossed, Pikachu dozing on his shoulder. What happened in there? What did you do? I got her out, Ash said simply. It wasn't that simple, Glad Ion pressed, taking a step closer. The readings we were getting, the energy signatures were off the charts. You were fighting that thing for over an hour. Solgalio's power, your Pokémon, and something else. An energy spike we couldn't identify. It was you, wasn't it? Ash met his gaze. He didn't deny it. The beast had her woven into its consciousness. I had to give her a reason to fight back from the inside. Gladion's eyes widened slightly. He understood. Ash hadn't just overpowered the monster, he had performed psychic surgery in the middle of a cosmic hurricane. He had reached into the heart of the hive mind and pulled Lusamine's will to the surface. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. And the escape? Gladion's voice was lower now. The wormhole collapsed and reformed. For 3.7 seconds, all our sensors registered, nothing. A void. We thought you were gone. Ash's posture didn't change, but a flicker of the memory, the absolute cold, the crushing apathy, crossed his mind. We hit a rough patch. That's all. He wasn't ready to talk about it. He couldn't even put words to what he'd felt. It was a threat he didn't understand, and he never spoke about threats he didn't understand. The blast door hissed open. Wick stepped out, her usually cheerful face drawn and tired. She pulled off her surgical mask, her expression grim. Lillie rushed to her side instantly. Wick? Is she? The president is stable, Wick said, her professional calm a thin veneer over her exhaustion. We've administered the antivenom and purged the majority of the Nihilego toxins from her system. Physically, she will recover. Lillie sagged with relief, a sob catching in her throat. Oh, thank Tapu Koko. But? Glad Ion asked, cutting to the chase. Wick sighed, her gaze drifting to the closed door. But the psychological damage is extensive. The neurotoxin doesn't just control, it forms a symbiotic link. She was part of a hive mind, experiencing its thoughts, its desires. To have that ripped away, it's left a vacuum. She's awake, but she's detached. Catatonic, almost. She responds to stimuli, but there's no emotion. It's like the part of her that feels has been cauterized. The hope on Lillie's face crumbled. So she's still gone. No, Wick said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Not gone. Just lost. It will take time. We have to be patient. She then turned her attention to Ash, her eyes filled with a deep, weary gratitude. The work you did today, Ash, there are no words. You saved her. You saved all of us. Ash simply inclined his head. Just get her better. He pushed off the wall, intending to find a quiet place, to let the family have their space. But as he turned, a voice, cold and clear as ice, echoed from the medbay's internal comms. Wick. Bring him in. It was Lusamine. Wick jumped, startled. Lillie and Gladion froze. The voice was hers, but it was utterly devoid of warmth or inflection. It was the voice of the Ether President, a tool of command. And my children, the voice added. Now. Wick looked at Ash, her expression pleading. He gave another short nod. Whatever this was, it was better to face it head-on. He walked past her, through the blast door, with Lillie and Gladion following like specters in his wake. The medbay was sterile and white, filled with the quiet beeping of monitors. Lusamine was sitting upright in the bed, not reclining. The dark veins on her skin had faded, but her complexion was pale, almost translucent. She was dressed in a simple, white medical gown, yet she wore it like royal attire. Her hair had been brushed and fell perfectly around her shoulders. But it was her eyes that held them captive. They were the same piercing green, but the frantic obsession was gone, replaced by a chilling, absolute clarity. It was like looking at a perfectly cut diamond, beautiful, brilliant, and impossibly hard. She watched them enter, her gaze sweeping over Lillie's tear-streaked face and Gladion's tense posture before settling on Ash. She studied him, not as a person, but as one might study a complex piece of machinery, analyzing its capabilities, its design, its purpose. The reports of your exploits have always been exaggerated, I assumed, she began, her voice a precise, level monotone. The savior of Kalos. The confidant of legendaries. The boy who stares down gods and does not flinch. I dismissed it as youthful hyperbole. I was wrong. She gestured to a chair beside her bed. It was not a request. Sit. Ash remained standing. Pikachu, on his shoulder, let out a low, suspicious cha. Lusamine's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. I am not accustomed to being disobeyed. And I'm not one of your employees, Ash replied, his tone even. He wasn't being defiant for the sake of it. He was establishing the ground rules of this new, bizarre encounter. He would not be commanded. A long, tense silence stretched. Lillie looked back and forth between them, her hands twisting the hem of her dress. Gladion stood rigid, watching the silent battle of wills. A strange, phantom of a smile touched Lusamine's lips. It did not reach her eyes. No. You are not. You are something far more valuable. She folded her hands in her lap, the picture of serene authority. I have had time to think, in the quiet. The toxins may be gone, but the clarity they provided remains. My ambition was correct, but my methods were flawed. I sought a perfect world, a perfect beauty, but I relied on an unstable, alien power. I tried to become the strength I needed. Her gaze hardened, locking onto Ash. That is no longer necessary. Because I have found it. She turned her head slightly, acknowledging her children for the first time. Lillie. Gladden. You have been a source of disappointment. Weakness. Your defiance, your sentimentality. It endangered everything. But your one, single act of value was bringing this young man into our orbit. Mother. Lillie whispered, stung to the core. Be silent, Lusamine commanded, and the sheer, cold force of her will made Lillie flinch back. I am not here to debate the past. I am here to secure the future. The Ether Foundation, and by extension, Alola itself, is vulnerable. The ultra wormholes are a reality now. We tore holes in the fabric of space-time. Other things may come through. Worse things. Ash thought of the patch of cold, starless black. Worse things. My foundation requires an ultimate deterrent, Lusamine continued, her voice taking on the cadence of a corporate officer unveiling a new strategic initiative. A protector. An aegis whose power is absolute and whose loyalty is unquestionable. You, Ash Ketchum, have demonstrated that power. She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the room. Therefore, I have a proposal. A reward, for your service. Ash remained silent, his expression unreadable. You will bind yourself to my family. To the Ether Foundation. In return for your permanent protection, you will be granted status and resources beyond your imagining. You will have a home, a purpose beyond wandering from region to region, collecting badges. You will become a pillar of Alola. Gladian's eyes widened as he began to understand the horrifying direction this was heading. Mother, what are you saying? Lusamine ignored him, her entire focus on Ash. A mere contract is insufficient. Such an arrangement must be sealed by a bond that is absolute, personal, and political. A union of families. She finally looked at her daughter, her gaze as impersonal as if Lillie were a piece of property being appraised. You have demonstrated a curious affection for my daughter. And she, in her own way, is devoted to you. Lillie will be your wife. The world seemed to stop. Lillie let out a tiny, strangled gasp, her face draining of all color. She looked at her mother, then at Ash, her expression one of utter, soul-crushing horror. This wasn't a reward. This was a sentence. She was being bartered, a clause in a contract for a living weapon. That is insane, Gladion snarled, stepping forward. You can't just. Furthermore, Lusamine continued, cutting him off as if he hadn't spoken, her chilling gaze returning to Ash, a possessive fire now burning in their depths. Lillie is still a child. She is weak. She cannot possibly comprehend or match the power you wield. Such a burden cannot be placed on her alone. An aegis of your stature requires a partner who understands power. Who understands ambition. Who is your equal? She leaned forward slightly, the first hint of genuine emotion, a terrifying, possessive desire, coloring her words. Therefore, I too shall be your wife. You will have the daughter to temper your heart, and the mother to sharpen your will. You will be husband to Lillie, and prince consort to me. Through this union, you will be bound to the Ether Foundation, and my family will be forever secured by your strength. It is the only logical, perfect solution. She finished, her hands still folded neatly in her lap, as if she had just proposed a merger between two corporations. She had offered him her daughter, herself, and her entire empire, not out of love or passion, but as payment for services rendered and a retainer for all services henceforth. It was the most audacious, most horrifying, most indecent proposal Ash had ever heard. The monitors beeped softly, the only sound in the suffocating silence. Lillie was shaking so hard it was a miracle she was still standing, silent tears streaming down her face. Gladion looked like he was about to commit murder, his body vibrating with a rage so profound it was almost visible. And Ash. Ash was perfectly still. He let the silence hang, let the shock and horror of the proposal settle over the room. He looked at Lillie's shattered expression. He looked at Gladion's white-knuckled fury. And he looked at the woman in the bed, the brilliant, broken, terrifyingly powerful woman who was trying to chain him to her side with gilded shackles. Pikachu's cheek sparked, a low growl of warning in his throat. Ash rested a hand on his head, calming him with a single touch. Then, he spoke. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through the tension like a razor. No, it was a single word, delivered without anger or shock. It was a simple statement of fact. Lusamine's serene mask finally faltered. A crack of confusion appeared. I do not understand. The logic is flawless. I am offering you everything. You're offering me a cage, Ash said, taking a step forward. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes were on Lillie. You're putting your daughter in a cage and calling it a marriage. He turned his gaze to Lusamine, and for the first time, she saw the full, undiluted force of his will. It wasn't the fiery passion of a battle. It was a cold, immovable certainty, an authority that dwarfed her own. Your family is broken, he stated, his voice devoid of judgment. It was an observation. A diagnosis. You just came back from being fused with a monster, and the first thing you do is try to control everyone around you. You're trying to buy safety because you're scared. And a reward, a proposal like this, it can't fix that. He took another step, standing in the center of the room, an anchor point for the swirling storm of family trauma. He looked from Lusamine, to a trembling Lillie, to a seething Glad-Ion. I'm not for sale. And Lillie is not a prize to be won or a contract to be signed. He looked directly at the girl, his voice softening just enough to be a lifeline in the suffocating atmosphere. You're not a bargaining chip, Lillie. Not anymore. She looked up at him, her tear-filled eyes wide with a desperate, dawning hope. Ash turned his attention back to the Ether President. He had dismantled her logic, refused her offer, and invalidated her premise. He now held all the power in the room. And with it, he dictated the new terms. I'll stay in Alola, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. I won't be your husband, and I won't be your Aegis. He let the words hang, his gaze sweeping over all of them, a silent promise and a warning. I'll stay until I know you're all safe. From yourselves, and from anything else. The finality in his tone was absolute. He had not just refused her indecent proposal. He had seized control of their future, placing himself not as their property, but as their self-appointed, probationary guardian. The Queen of Ether Paradise had tried to buy a champion and had instead found herself under the watch of a king. Chapter 2, Echoes of the Fall. The news of what transpired in Lusamine's medical bay did not spread through Ether Paradise like wildfire. Wildfire is chaotic, noisy, and hot. This was more like a chemical agent, colorless and silent, seeping through the ventilation shafts and under locked doors, changing the very atmosphere of the facility. The staff, trained to a point of unflappable professionalism, suddenly found themselves unable to meet each other's eyes. They spoke in hushed tones in the cafeterias, their conversations halting whenever Lillie or Glad-Ion walked past. They looked at Ash Ketchum not with the awe due a hero, but with a new, complex mixture of fear, pity, and morbid curiosity. He was no longer just the boy who had won their league, he was the man who had been offered the keys to the kingdom and its two queens. Professor Kukui's lab, built into the rocky coastline of Mele Mele Island, was a welcome chaos of discarded notes, half-finished projects, and the lingering, comfortable scent of coffee and seawater. It felt real, a world away from the sterile perfection of Ether Paradise. Ash sat on a stool, nursing a mug of lukewarm coffee, while Pikachu happily devoured a bowl of custom-made Pokémon food on the counter. Kukui leaned against a workbench cluttered with Zering schematics, his arms crossed, his usual easygoing grin absent. The kahunas are in an uproar, Ash. Word travels fast on these islands. They're demanding an audience. They're worried Lusamine is trying to sink her claws into Alola's first champion. Into you. She tried, Ash said, his voice level. He took a slow sip of coffee. It didn't work. Yeah, that's the other half of the story, Kukui said, running a hand through his hair. The part that has everyone really spooked. You said no. To Lusamine. To the whole deal. Ash, nobody says no to the Ether President, especially not when she's offering you, well, everything. He shook his head, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. They say you took control of the situation. That you put her on probation. Someone had to, Ash replied simply. He looked out the window at the waves crashing against the shore. She's not well, Kukui. She came back from that place, harder. Colder. She's trying to build walls, and she's using Lillie and Glad-Ion as the bricks. I'm just making sure they don't get crushed while she does it. Kukui studied him for a long moment. This was not the same enthusiastic, slightly naive kid he had first welcomed into his home. The fire was still there, but it was deeper, more controlled, like the heart of a forge rather than a bonfire. The journey through ultra-space, the fight with the mother beast, it had tempered him into something new. Something older. Just be careful, Kukui said, his voice softening. Power like the ether foundations, it doesn't just ask once. It finds ways of getting what it wants. You're playing a dangerous game. I'm not playing a game, Ash said, his eyes meeting Kukui's. The look in them was clear and hard as diamond. I'm ending one. The beach on Mele Mele Island was a crescent of fine, white sand, lapped by gentle, turquoise waves. It was here that Lillie had first learned to touch a Pokémon without freezing in terror. Now, she used it as her training ground, a place to forge her newfound resolve into something tangible. Snowy, use powder snow again. A wider arc this time. Lillie commanded, her voice sharp with an uncharacteristic intensity. Her Alolan Vulpix, Snowy, braced its small paws in the sand and unleashed a glittering wave of ice and snow. It was a powerful attack, far stronger than it had been just weeks ago, but it was unfocused. The icy powder sprayed in a ragged cone, kicking up sand and dissipating harmlessly into the warm air. No, that's not it. Lillie said, frustrated. It has to be faster. More controlled. Again. Snowy whined, a low, tired sound. The fur around its muzzle was matted with sand, and it was breathing heavily. It looked up at its trainer, its blue eyes filled with confusion. This wasn't their usual gentle practice. This was a drill. A relentless one. We have to be stronger, Lillie whispered, more to herself than to her Pokémon. She clenched her fists, her knuckles white. The scene in the medical bay played over and over in her mind, her mother's cold voice, the dead look in her eyes as she offered Lillie up like a prize, like a piece of her own estate. And then Ash's voice, cutting through the horror, she is not a prize to be won. He had given her a shield. Now she had to forge her own sword. She couldn't stand behind him forever. She couldn't be the girl who needed saving. If she was to have a place in the new, terrifying world her mother was building, she had to earn it. She would not be a clause in a contract. She would be a partner. I'm sorry, Snowy, she said, her voice softening as she knelt down and gathered the exhausted Vulpix into her arms. I'm sorry. I'm pushing too hard. She held her partner close, burying her face in its cool fur. I have to be able to stand on my own. Snowy licked her cheek, a quiet reassurance. They would get there. Together. A shadow fell over them. Lillie looked up to see Gladion standing there, his arms crossed, Silvally at his side. His expression was as grim and unreadable as ever. He's on the island, Gladion said, without preamble. Lillie knew exactly who he was. Why? Kukui wanted to talk to him. But now he's heading this way. I sent him a message. Told him to meet me at the western shore. The rocky flats. Lillie's blood ran cold. The western shore was where trainers went to settle serious disputes. It was a desolate, unforgiving landscape of black volcanic rock and violent surf. Gladion, what are you going to do? I'm going to get an answer, Gladion said, his gaze hard. Mother tried to acquire him, to make him the family's ultimate weapon. I need to know what she saw. I need to measure the man she tried to buy. He looked down at his sister, his voice losing some of its edge. You think he's a hero. I think he's a complication. But before I decide what kind of complication, I need to see it for myself. I need to feel his power firsthand. He turned to leave, Silvally falling into step behind him. Stay here, Lillie. This isn't a spar. It's an audit. The air on the western shore tasted of salt and power. The waves didn't lap here, they crashed, sending plumes of white spray high into the air against jagged black rocks. It was a primal, elemental place, a fitting arena for what was to come. Ash arrived to find Gladion waiting for him, standing on a wide, flat expanse of rock that served as a natural battlefield. The wind whipped at Gladion's platinum hair, his dark clothes a stark contrast to the churning sea behind him. Gladion, Ash said, his tone even. Lillie's safe. This isn't about Lillie, Gladion retorted, his hand moving to the belt of pokeballs at his waist. This is about you. I need to understand what you are. My mother sees you as a tool. My sister sees you as a savior. I see a variable that has thrown my entire world into chaos. He pulled a pokeball from his belt, his eyes blazing with intensity. Words are cheap. Show me. Show me the power that brought a legendary to its knees and made my mother think she could own a god. 6 on 6. No holding back. Ash looked at Gladion, seeing the desperate need for certainty behind the challenge. This wasn't just about pride. It was a search for truth in the only language Gladion truly trusted, the language of battle. Ash gave a slow, deliberate nod. All right. He reached up, and Pikachu leaped from his shoulder to the ground, his cheeks already sparking, his small body tense with anticipation. But you should know, Ash added, his voice dropping slightly, I don't hold back. Gladion's only reply was a grim smile. Good. He threw his first pokeball. Umbreon, go. The sleek, black Pokemon materialized on the rocks, its golden rings glowing faintly. Ash considered Pikachu, then shook his head. He reached for a different ball on his belt. Sceptile, I need you. The hulking green Pokemon appeared with a roar, its leafy tail blades rustling in the wind. The contrast was stark, Umbreon, the patient, defensive tank, against Sceptile, the lightning-fast offensive powerhouse. A poor matchup, Ketchum, Gladion taunted. My Umbreon can outlast anything you throw at it. Use Toxic. Umbreon opened its mouth and spat a glob of purple poison. Sceptile, dodge it. Leaf Blade. Ash commanded. Sceptile moved with impossible speed, a green blur that easily sidestepped the poison. Its arm blades glowed with green energy as it charged. Protect. Gladion countered. A green shield shimmered into existence around Umbreon just as Sceptile's attack connected, the impact echoing across the flats. You're too predictable, Gladion said. Now, confuse Ray. But Ash was a step ahead. Sceptile, into the air. Leaf Storm. Sceptile leaped high, twisting its body and unleashing a cyclone of razor-sharp leaves. The attack wasn't aimed at Umbreon, it was aimed at the entire area around it, creating a swirling vortex that shredded the confused Ray before it could connect and kicked up a blinding screen of mist and foliage. Now! Ash yelled. From the heart of the storm, Sceptile descended like a hawk, its eyes locked on Umbreon. Gladion couldn't see it coming. The leaf blade struck not from the front, but from above, bypassing Umbreon's defensive posture and landing a critical blow. The dark type crumpled to the stone, unable to battle. Gladion stared, stunned. Ash hadn't just used brute force. He had used Sceptile's overwhelming offense to control the battlefield itself, turning Gladion's defensive strategy against him. He recalled Umbreon, his expression hardening. Luck. Crobat, let's see how he handles speed. The four-winged bat Pokemon shot into the air with a piercing cry. Ash smiled faintly. Speed, huh? Okay, Pikachu, you're up. Pikachu darted onto the field, a tiny yellow bolt of lightning against the black rock. Crobat, Air Slash. Don't let it breathe. Gladion commanded. Crobat swooped, its wings glowing as it fired off rapid-fire blades of air. Pikachu, Agility. Ash called. Pikachu became a blur, weaving between the air slash attacks with movements so fast it looked like he was teleporting. He wasn't just dodging, he was closing the distance, getting under Crobat's optimal attack range. Too close. Cross poison. Gladion ordered. Crobat folded its wings and dived, its fangs glowing with purple energy. Pikachu, Iron Tail on the ground, now. It was an insane command. Pikachu didn't hesitate. He spun, his tail glowing like polished steel, and slammed it into the volcanic rock. The impact didn't just crack the stone, it launched Pikachu into the air like a cannonball, propelled by his own attack. He met the diving Crobat head-on, his smaller body using the momentum to flip over the bat Pokémon. In mid-air, upside down, Ash gave the final command. Thunderbolt. A massive bolt of electricity erupted from Pikachu, striking Crobat at point-blank range. The bat Pokémon seized up and fell from the sky, knocked out. 2-0. Gladion was breathing heavily now, not from exertion, but from sheer shock. The speed, the strategy, the perfect, unspoken synergy, this was a level of battling he had only ever read about. He sent out Zoroark, the master of illusions. Ash countered with his Incineroar. The battle was a brutal, fiery dance, but Incineroar's raw, wrestler's instinct saw through Zoroark's tricks, ending the match with a devastating Darkest Lariat. 3-0. Next came the mirror match, Gladion's Lycanroc vs Ash's. They were both dusk form, but where Gladion's was a precise and vicious weapon, Ash's was a barely contained storm. They met in a flurry of Stone Edge and Accelerock, a brutal, high-speed clash of claws and fangs. It ended when Ash's Lycanroc, its eyes glowing with a fierce red light, caught Gladion's in a grapple and used its own momentum against it, ending the fight with a point-blank crunch. 4-0. Weevil was next, a blur of ice and darkness. Ash's response was a Pokémon Gladion had only heard stories about. Greninja, let's go. The frog ninja Pokémon appeared in a crouch, its presence immediately changing the tenor of the battle. The air grew heavy. Weevil charged, a phantom of motion. But Greninja was faster. Their battle was a spectacle, a high-speed ballet of Night Slash and Water Shuriken that was almost too fast for the eye to follow. Then, it happened. Stronger. Let's go all out. Ash yelled, a fire in his eyes. A vortex of water erupted around Greninja, coalescing on its back into a giant shuriken. Its form shifted, becoming sleeker, more powerful, its face taking on faint red markings that mirrored Ash's own. Ash Greninja was here. Gladion's jaw went slack. He was witnessing a legend. The transformation, bond phenomenon, was a power that defied scientific explanation. What followed was not a battle, it was a demonstration. Ash Greninja moved with a grace and power that was simply otherworldly, ending the fight in a single, devastatingly powerful blow. 5-0. Gladion was left with only one Pokémon, his partner, his ace, the one being he trusted above all others. Silvally, it's all on you. The synthetic Pokémon appeared with a cry that was part beast, part machine. It looked at the exhausted but victorious Pokémon on Ash's side, then at Pikachu, who had stepped forward again, ready for the final round. Dark Memory, now. Multi-attack. Gladion yelled, inserting a memory drive into Silvally's head. Silvally's features glowed with a dark aura as it transformed into a dark type, making it immune to Pikachu's electric attacks. A brilliant tactical move. Pikachu, quick attack and Iron Tail. Ash commanded. Pikachu charged, his tail glowing. The two Pokémon met in a titanic clash. Silvally was a beast, its manufactured body designed for combat, its multi-attack a furious flurry of blows. It drove Pikachu back, overwhelming him with raw power. But Pikachu was relentless. He ducked and weaved, his small size an advantage, landing glancing blows with Iron Tail and refusing to give an inch. It's not enough. Gladion roared, seeing his chance. Finish it, Silvally. Full power. Silvally reared back, its body crackling with dark energy for one final, overwhelming assault. Ash stood firm. He raised his hand, displaying the Z-ring on his wrist. He touched the crystal, and it began to glow, the light flaring to life. Pikachu. This is it. Let's show him everything we've got. Pikachu leaped high into the air, and Ash began the motions, a dance of perfect synchrony with his partner. The energy of the island itself seemed to answer his call, flowing into him, into Pikachu. 10 million. Volt. Thunderbolt. It was not just an attack. It was a statement. A rainbow-hued storm of absolute electrical power erupted from Pikachu, a cataclysmic wave of energy that dwarfed any thunderbolt he had ever used. It crashed into Silvalley's multi-attack. For a moment, the two forces struggled, a blinding sphere of light and darkness warring for dominance on the rocky flats. Then, the Z-move tore through. Silvally was thrown backward, its body seizing from the incredible voltage, before it crashed to the stone, unconscious. Silence. The only sounds were the crashing of the waves and the ragged gasps of Gladion. He stared at his defeated partner, then at Ash, who stood calmly, Pikachu leaping back to his shoulder, tired but triumphant. Ash hadn't just won. He had dismantled Gladion's entire team, a team trained to perfection, designed for elite combat. He had done it with superior strategy, unconventional tactics, an unbreakable bond with his Pokémon, and a level of power that bordered on the divine. Gladion slowly recalled Silvally, his movements stiff. He looked at Ash, his pride shattered, but in its place, a new, profound understanding was dawning. "Oh. You're not a person," Gladion breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "My mother was wrong. You can't be bought. You can't be owned." He finally met Ash's eyes, a look of grim, absolute respect on his face. "You're a force of nature." The moment of resolution was broken by a sudden, unnatural stillness. The roaring of the waves faded. The cries of the wind gull overhead ceased. The wind died. An oppressive, heavy silence descended upon the shore, so absolute it felt like a pressure against their eardrums. "What's happening?" Gladion asked, looking around wildly. Ash was already moving. "The forest," he said, his voice tight. "It's coming from the forest." They ran, their footsteps unnervingly loud in the dead air. They burst through the tree-line into a world of muted color. The vibrant greens of the jungle were faded, the bright flowers a pale, sickly hue. Pokémon were cowering in the undergrowth, their bodies trembling, not with fear, but with a strange lethargy. Then they saw it. In a small clearing, a Lycanroc stood, its back to them. But its fur, which should have been a rich, dusky orange, was a mottled, lifeless gray. It moved its head, the motion jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on a string. It turned, and its eyes were empty, milky white voids. It let out a howl, but no sound came out. A silent scream that seemed to suck the energy from the air around it. "What is that thing?" Gladion whispered, reaching for a pokeball. "Don't," Ash warned, his hand on Gladion's arm. "That's not a Pokémon." The gray Lycanroc's head snapped toward them. It bounded forward, its movements unnaturally fast and silent. It wasn't running, it was gliding over the ground, an animated shadow. It leaped, claws extended, aiming for Gladion. "Pikachu, Thunderbolt!" Ash yelled. Pikachu fired a bolt of lightning that struck the creature midair. It convulsed, but it didn't cry out in pain. It simply flickered, like a bad projection, before landing and charging again. "It's empty," Ash realized. "There's nothing inside it." The creature lunged for Ash this time. "Pikachu, full power. Don't hold back." Pikachu's body erupted in a massive discharge of electricity, a raw, brilliant expression of his life force. The thunderbolt engulfed the gray Lycanroc. This time, the effect was different. The creature didn't just flicker. Its form began to unravel, its edges dissolving into black and gray static. With a final, silent shudder, it disintegrated completely, turning into a cloud of swirling dust and motes of light that faded into nothing, leaving not even a shadow behind. They stood in the silent, colorless clearing, staring at the spot where the creature had been. There was a palpable coldness in the air, a void where the thing had stood. They hadn't just fought a monster. They had fought an absence. An echo of something that was now gone. Back on Ether Paradise, in a darkened control room, an alarm blared to life. Faba stared at a monitor, his eyes wide behind his green visor. "Madam President, you need to see this." Lusamine strode over, her gaze locking onto the screen. It showed the energy readings from the western shore. Alongside the massive, familiar spikes of power from the battle, a new signature had appeared. It was a sharp, deep trough, an energy reading that plunged into the negatives. "What am I looking at?" Lusamine asked, her voice cold. I don't know," Faba admitted, his scientific certainty shaken to its core. "It's the inverse of a life force signature. A literal negative." It appeared, and then it was neutralized by a massive bioelectric discharge from Ketchum's Pikachu. He looked up at her, his face pale. "It's as you predicted. Something else is here. And it is not alive." Chapter 3, The Ether Alliance. The laboratory was silent, but it was a technological silence, not the empty, predatory quiet of the forest. It was the sound of humming servers, whirring ventilation, and the faint, rhythmic beep of a diagnostic array. On a large, circular holotable in the center of Faba's primary research deck, a three-dimensional image of the corrupted Lycanroc rotated slowly. It was a perfect reconstruction, assembled from a dozen different high-speed scans taken during the battle. Its colors were wrong, a spectrum of lifeless grays and dusty blacks. Its form seemed to flicker at the edges, as if reality itself had grown tired of rendering it. Gladion stood with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the hologram of the creature he had failed to defeat. His own Lycanroc, the vibrant red of its dusk form, stood beside him, a low growl still rumbling in its chest as it stared at the ghost of its corrupted cousin. The memory of the fight was a fresh wound. It hadn't fought with passion or rage. It had fought with the methodical emptiness of a machine, and that was what disturbed him the most. Faba, looking even more severe than usual in a fresh lab coat, gestured at the image with a stylus. "The cellular decay is unprecedented. There was no biological agent, no virus, no poison we can identify. The subject's life energy was simply absent. The energy readings we took are even more confounding. Every living being, every Pokémon, radiates a distinct life force signature. This creature radiated the inverse of that. A negative value. A bioenergetic vacuum." Ash stood on the other side of the table, Pikachu on his shoulder, both of them watching the rotating image with an unnerving stillness. The Echo. A name had begun to form in his mind. It wasn't the creature itself. It was the memory of a creature, animated by the void that had consumed it. "It's not a Pokémon anymore," Ash stated, his voice cutting through Faba's scientific jargon. "It's just an echo." Faba adjusted his green visor, clearly annoyed by the interruption but not bold enough to challenge the man who had stared down the Ether President. A poetic, if unscientific, assessment. The fact remains, this echo manifested on Melee Island, a place of significant population. If an entity of this nature appeared in Hawali City, he let the sentence hang, the implication clear. The door to the lab hissed open. Lusamine entered, flanked by two Ether security guards who stopped and took up positions outside. She was no longer in a medical gown. She wore a crisp, white business suit, tailored to perfection. Her hair was pulled back into a severe but elegant bun, and her face was a mask of cool, corporate authority. The traumatized patient was gone. The Ether President was back in command of her fortress. She walked directly to the holotable, her eyes immediately assessing the data stream scrolling on its periphery. Report. The threat is terrestrial, Madam President, Faba said, snapping to attention. Our long-range sensors detected no atmospheric or extradimensional entry points. The anomaly that created the subject originated on the island. So, the enemy is already inside the gates, Lusamine murmured, her gaze flicking to Ash. There was no hint of their last conversation in her expression, only a shared, grim understanding. The threat she had predicted was here. Ash met her gaze and pushed away from the table. He had spent the night thinking, replaying the battle, the feeling of the void in the wormhole, and Lusamine's insane proposal. He had seen the fear beneath her power play, and he knew that fear was now justified. Logic, not emotion, was the only way to move forward. He deactivated the hologram with a swipe of his hand, plunging the room into the low, ambient light of the servers. This isn't your problem to solve alone, and it isn't mine. It's ours. He walked toward Lusamine's private office, a silent command for her to follow. Gladion watched him go, a flicker of surprise on his face. No one simply led his mother anywhere. Yet, after a moment's hesitation, Lusamine turned and followed Ash, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Gladion made to follow, but a quiet word from Ash stopped him. Wait here. We need a plan first, not an argument. Gladion froze, then gave a curt, reluctant nod. Ash was right. Putting him and his mother in a room to plan anything would devolve into a fight within minutes. He trusted Ash to handle her. For now. Lusamine's office was as pristine and cold as the woman herself. A large, obsidian desk stood before a panoramic window that looked out over the main conservation area of Ether Paradise. There were no personal photos, no clutter. Just a terminal, a data pad, and a single, perfectly sculpted white orchid. Ash didn't wait for her to take her seat. He stood in the center of the room, turning to face her. The thing in the forest was a symptom. The disease is that, silence. The void. I felt it in the wormhole. It's drawn to energy. It consumes it. Lusamine's composure was flawless, but her hands, resting on the back of her chair, were clenched tight. An entity that feeds on life itself. How do you fight that? You don't fight it, Ash said. You hunt it. You track it, you analyze it, and you find a way to contain or repel it. And you do it before it makes another move. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. I have the field experience. I have Pokemon that can stand against these things. You have the resources. The best scientific minds in the world, a network of sensors across Alola, and the money to fund whatever we need. Alone, we're a scientist without a sword and a warrior without a map. Together, we're an army. He was proposing an alliance. Not the personal, possessive union she had demanded, but a strategic, military one. It was a calculated move. He was offering her a way to be central to the solution, to wield her power and influence, and to work alongside him, all the things her broken psyche craved, but on his terms. It was a brilliant, pragmatic compromise. A long silence stretched between them. She studied him, the cold calculation in her eyes warring with the ghost of her possessive desire. He was offering her a partnership, not ownership. It was less than she wanted, but more than she had any right to expect. And he was right. The logic was, as she would say, flawless. This alliance, she said, her voice carefully neutral. What would it be called? The Ether Alliance, Ash replied without hesitation. Your resources, your name. My command in the field. A joint operation. He gave her the dignity of the name, a small concession that cost him nothing and gave her the legitimacy she needed. A slow, genuine smile, the first he had ever seen from her, touched her lips. It was a smile of pure, intellectual satisfaction. The Ether Alliance. It has a certain authority. She walked around her desk and finally sat, the queen retaking her throne. She tapped her terminal, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. Done. You will have unlimited access to all Foundation resources. Personnel, equipment, research data. Everything. Faba and his team will report to you for all matters concerning this threat. I will coordinate logistics and act as central command. She looked up at him, her eyes sharp and alive. What is your first order, Field Commander? Before Ash could answer, the office door slid open. Lillie stood there, her expression a mixture of fear and fierce determination. She was holding a datapad, her knuckles white where she gripped it. Snowy, her Alolan Vulpix, stood at her feet, looking equally resolute. I'm not going to be sidelined, Lillie said, her voice shaking but firm. She took a breath and stepped into the room, forcing herself to meet her mother's surprised and faintly annoyed gaze. I'm not going to be a liability, and I'm not going to be protected. I want a role. Lillie, this is not a school project, Lusamine began, her tone dismissive. This is a matter of regional security, and I can help, Lillie interrupted, her voice gaining strength. She stepped forward and placed her datapad on her mother's desk. On the screen was a map of Alola, dotted with dozens of small, red markers. I've been cross-referencing the energy readings from the Echo incident with the Foundation's archived atmospheric data from the past 72 hours. These markers indicate minute, localized energy drops. Too small to trigger any major alarms, but consistent with the negative energy signature Faba found. They're happening all over the islands. Ash looked at the map, then at Lillie, a flicker of pride in his eyes. While everyone else was reacting to the Lycanroc, she had already been hunting for the cause. They're faint, Lillie continued, pointing to a cluster on the map. Like whispers. But they're getting more frequent. I'm not a field trainer like Ash, or a battler like Gladion. But I know how to read data. I can coordinate research. I can triage incoming field reports and find the patterns. Let me be the one to connect your command center to their boots on the ground. She was not asking for permission. She was presenting her case, demonstrating her value. She had taken his words to heart. She was refusing to be a bargaining chip. Lusamine stared at the map, then at her daughter. For a moment, the Ether president seemed to see Lillie not as a disappointment or a pawn, but as a capable, intelligent young woman. An asset. Very well, Lusamine said, her tone crisp and professional. You will be head of analysis and communications for the Alliance. You will coordinate all incoming data and serve as the direct liaison between me and the field team. Do not fail. I won't, Lillie said, a wave of relief and purpose washing over her. She looked at Ash, a grateful, determined glint in her eyes. He gave her a subtle nod of approval. The Alliance now had its three core components, the command, the field, and the intelligence. The next few days were a blur of focused activity. Ether Paradise transformed from a pristine conservation center into a military-grade command hub. The main rotunda became the Alliance's war room, dominated by a massive holographic map of Alola that was fed real-time data from a network of newly deployed Ether drones and portable sensor grids. Lusamine was in her element, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of logistics. She moved around the platform overlooking the map, her voice a calm, authoritative instrument issuing orders, rerouting power, and deploying assets with terrifying efficiency. She was a queen defending her kingdom, and she was magnificent at it. Lillie commanded her own corner of the room, a nexus of screens and analysts. She had become the voice in their ear, a constant, calm presence that filtered the firehose of raw data into actionable intelligence. The field team, Ash and Gladion, moved fast. Their first operation was to investigate the sites of the minor energy drops Lillie had identified. They swept through Melee Island on the back of Ash's Charizard and Gladion's Silvally, a two-man rapid response unit. Lillie, what's our status? Ash's voice was clipped over the comms unit in his ear as Charizard banked hard over a dense patch of jungle. New reading, Ash. 0.2 kilometers north of your position, Lillie's voice came back, clear and steady. Near the stream. It's a faint one, but it just dropped another 0.02%. On it, Ash said. Gladion, you take the east bank, I'll take the west. Copy, Gladion's voice grunted in reply. They landed in a small clearing. The air here was heavy, the usual cacophony of jungle life muted to a dull hum. The vibrant greens of the ferns seemed faded, as if seen through a dusty lens. Getting close, Ash said, dismounting. Pikachu was on his shoulder, nose twitching, his cheeks sparking nervously. Pikachu can feel it. They found the spot by the stream. It was a small patch of ground, no bigger than a large blanket. The grass was gray and brittle. A cluster of pink oricorio feathers lay on the ground, their color almost entirely leached away, looking like ash. There was no body. Just the lingering, cold silence and the faint, negative energy signature that made the hair on their arms stand up. It was here, Gladion said, kneeling down and touching the gray grass. It crumbled to dust at his touch. And now it's gone. Lillie, are you getting this? Ash asked. Reading it loud and clear, Ash. The signature is already decaying. It's like the place is, forgetting it was ever there. A moment of silence, then, Faba has a suggestion. Faba's reedy voice cut in, tinny over the comms. Field Commander, the fleeting nature of these phenomena is making data collection difficult. If you could locate a forming anomaly, it might be possible to use a cryocontainment unit to stabilize and capture it. Bringing a sample back to the lab would accelerate our research exponentially. The logic was sound, from a purely scientific standpoint. Capture the disease to study it. Ash's response was instant and cold. Negative. But Commander, the data, Faba, Ash cut him off, his voice dropping low, laced with an authority that left no room for debate. Listen to me very carefully. The thing we're hunting is a predator that eats reality. It's a hole in the world. You don't study a void by letting it into your home. A stunned silence followed from the other end of the comm in the war room. Lillie looked up from her console, startled by the sheer force of his command. Lusamine, who had been listening in, paused her work. Ash had not just rejected a scientific proposal, he had defined the very nature of their enemy and the rules of engagement in a single, chilling sentence. He understood the metaphysical danger, not just the physical one. Lusamine looked at the main screen, at the icon representing Ash in the field. A flicker of something, respect, perhaps even fear, crossed her face before she schooled her features back into a neutral mask. She had wanted a weapon. She had gotten a general. The field commander's orders stand, Lusamine said into her own comm, her voice reinforcing Ash's authority. There will be no capture attempts. All teams are to observe, report, and withdraw. Faba, recalibrate your sensors to track decay patterns. That's an order. Yes. Madam President, Faba stammered, chastened. On the ground, Ash turned away from the dead patch of grass. There's nothing more here. Let's move on. Gladion looked from the spot to Ash, a new level of understanding in his eyes. He had seen Ash's power in battle. Now he was seeing his wisdom as a commander. He was making the hard, right calls, not just the easy, logical ones. As they prepared to leave, Lillie's voice came over the comms again, a new urgency in her tone. Ash, Gladion. I think I have something. I've been running projections, mapping the incidents against a topographical energy grid of Alola. A holographic map materialized in the air from a small projector on Ash's wrist. Dozens of red dots pulsed on the screen. The incidents aren't random, Lillie said, her voice filled with the thrill of discovery and the dread of its implications. They're not targeting population centers. They're targeting places of high spiritual and life energy concentration. Look. Lines of light began to connect the dots, forming distinct clusters. One was centered over the lush jungle on Akala Island, home to the Trial of Mallow. Another pulsed over the vast Pony Canyon, a place steeped in ancient history and power. The largest, most intense cluster was forming around the altar of the sun and the summit of Mount Lanakila. It's not just eating, Gladion breathed, staring at the map. No, Ash said, his eyes fixed on the pulsing red light over the altar of the sun. It's not just eating. It's hunting. Lillie's voice confirmed their dawning horror. It's a predator. And it's going after the biggest sources of life energy it can find. It's going after the hearts of the islands. The Tapu, and the legendaries. The true scale of the threat snapped into horrifying focus. They weren't just fighting to stop a few ghostly Pokemon from appearing. They were fighting to stop a cosmic predator from devouring the very soul of Alola. Chapter 4, The Sun's Shadow. The Ether Alliance War Room was a hive of controlled panic. On the immense holographic map that dominated the central space, the red markers of the negative energy incidents were no longer scattered, intermittent whispers. They were coalescing, forming angry, pulsing clusters over the islands of Alola like a spreading disease. The air hummed with the quiet, frantic energy of 24 analysts and researchers trying to chart the course of an enemy that defied physics. Lillie stood at her station, her face illuminated by the glow of 12 data streams. The determined girl from the beach had been replaced by a focused, weary intelligence officer. The propagation rate has tripled in the last 12 hours, she announced, her voice amplified throughout the room. The clusters aren't just growing, they're deepening. The negative energy readings at their epicenters are becoming exponentially stronger. She pointed to the largest, most virulent cluster, a seething vortex of red light that pulsed over the remote landmass of Pony Island. It's a predator that's systematically targeting the holiest sites in Alola. From across the room, Gladion, who had been cleaning his pokeballs with a grim, methodical focus, looked up. It's trying to eat the gods, he said, his voice flat. The statement, stripped of all hyperbole, landed with the weight of a slab of granite. Lusamine stood on the command platform overlooking the map, her posture rigid, her hands clasped behind her back. She watched the red lights bleed across the image of her region, her islands, her perfect paradise. Her expression was one of cold, calculating fury. This was an infestation, an imperfection of the highest order, and it was happening in her garden. All attempts to predict its next point of manifestation have failed, Faba reported, his voice strained. It does not follow any logical pattern of movement. It simply appears. It's not moving, it's hunting, Ash said, his voice cutting through the rising tension. He had been standing silently in the shadows near the edge of the room, simply watching the map, his presence a point of calm in the storm. Now, he stepped forward into the light. It's not spreading from place to place. It's reaching into our world wherever the veil is thinnest, wherever the energy is greatest. He gestured to the map. We're tracking its shadow. We're reacting. That's a losing strategy. He looked directly up at Lusamine on her platform. We need to stop reacting and start asking. We need to talk to something that has seen its face. Lusamine's eyes narrowed. And who, precisely, do you suggest we ask? The Tapu have gone silent. They've retreated deep into their domains, shoring up their own defenses. Not the Tapu, Ash said. His gaze shifted to the angry red cluster over Pony Island. Something older. Something stronger. He tapped a control on Lillie's console, and the map zoomed in on a single, ancient structure at the island's heart. The altar of the sun. Nebby, Lillie whispered, her eyes wide with understanding. Solgaleo fought with us in that dimension, Ash affirmed. It felt that coldness when the wormhole flickered. If anything in this world knows what we're facing, it's him. He turned back to Lusamine. We're going to the altar. And we're going to ask for help. A flicker of something crossed Lusamine's face. Annoyance. Disdain. She was a woman of science, of tangible results and absolute control. A pilgrimage to an ancient altar to beseech a mythical beast for answers was anathema to her entire worldview. It was an act of faith, an admission that her technology and her intellect were not enough. And you expect it to simply appear because you ask nicely, she said, her voice dripping with skepticism. Yes, Ash replied, without a hint of irony. The sheer, unshakable certainty in his voice silenced her. For a long moment, she simply stared at him, the master of a technological empire being told that the only solution was an appeal to myth and magic. She looked at the spreading red on her map, at the grim faces of her staff, and at the quiet, absolute confidence of the man before her. Her logic and control had failed. Perhaps it was time to try his. Fine, she said, her voice clipped. I will accompany you. I will not have my Ether Alliance's first diplomatic mission to a deity be conducted without my oversight. She was framing it as a political maneuver, a business trip. But Ash could see the fear in her eyes. She was afraid of the unknown, and even more afraid of being left behind. The flight to Pony Island was tense and quiet. The Ether Foundation helicopter cut through the sky, a marvel of modern engineering on its way to a place outside of time. Ash sat by the open door, the wind whipping through his hair, his expression calm and focused. Across from him, Lillie stared out at the passing clouds, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Next to her, Lusamine sat ramrod straight, her gaze fixed on a datapad, though Ash noted she hadn't scrolled or typed once. She was projecting an aura of detached business, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the device. As they flew over the vast, wild expanse of Pony Island, Lillie looked from the window to her mother. The president of the Ether Foundation looked small in the helicopter seat, a woman surrounded by the wind and the sky, heading towards a power she could not quantify or control. For the first time, Lillie felt a pang of something other than fear or resentment towards her mother. It was a flicker of empathy. Lusamine wasn't just a tyrant, she was a woman who had built an empire of control, and was now being forced to confront a universe of chaos she could not command. The helicopter set down in a clearing a respectful distance from the altar. The moment the blades stopped spinning, the modern world seemed to fall away, replaced by the deep, profound silence of the ancient site. The air was thin and cool, carrying the scent of stone and high-altitude flora. The altar of the sun rose before them, a massive stone edifice carved with weathered, esoteric symbols, its two central pillars framing the sky like a gateway to the heavens. They walked the final approach on foot. Their footsteps on the stone path seemed loud, intrusive. So, what's the plan? Lusamine asked, her voice a low, business-like murmur. Do you have a specific frequency you use to contact it? A psychic resonance pattern? I'm just going to call him, Ash said, as he came to a stop in the center of the massive circular platform. He closed his eyes. Pikachu leaped from his shoulder to the ground, standing as a silent, vigilant guard. Ash took a deep breath, letting the ancient energy of the place settle over him. He wasn't focusing on a strategy or a command. He was focusing on a memory, a tiny, floating puff of cosmic dust that loved star candy, the weight of a growing friend in his arms, the shared triumph of opening a path to save a mother. He reached out not with a demand, but with a feeling. A connection. His Zering began to glow, a soft, pulsating golden light. It wasn't the fierce, crackling energy of a Z-move, but a steady, resonant pulse, a beacon in the quiet. He didn't shout. He simply let his thoughts, his aura, extend into the space between worlds. Nebby, it's me. I need you. We need you. For a moment, there was nothing but the whisper of the wind across the stone. Lusamine crossed her arms, a skeptical frown touching her lips. Well, she was cut off as the air in front of them began to shimmer. It was like a heat haze, but it bent the light, twisting the image of the mountains behind it. The shimmer intensified, coalescing into a point of light so bright it was like a star being born in the middle of the day. A low, resonant hum filled the air, a sound that was felt in the bones more than heard with the ears. The light folded in on itself, and then, with a silent rush of displaced air, Solgaleo was there. It stood before them, its massive form radiating a quiet, immense power. Its mane shimmered with the light of a captured nebula, and its golden eyes, as old as the sun itself, surveyed them. It was not a monster or a beast. It was a king in its own court. It took a step forward, its huge paws silent on the ancient stone. It lowered its head to Lillie, who instinctively reached out and placed a hand on its muzzle, a silent, affectionate greeting between old friends. Then, the legendary's gaze shifted to Lusamine. The warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, divine judgment. Its eyes were not angry. They were simply all-knowing. It remembered her. It remembered the cage, the obsession, the violation of its other self. Lusamine flinched under the weight of that gaze, taking an involuntary step back, her carefully constructed composure cracking like thin ice. Finally, Solgaleo looked at Ash. Its expression softened. There was respect in those starry eyes. And concern. It let out a low chuff, a psychic query. "Why have you called?" "We need to know what we're fighting," Ash said, stepping forward. "We call it the silence. The null. The thing from the darkness between wormholes. We need to know what it is." Solgaleo raised its head and let out a roar. But it was not a sound. It was a wave of pure psychic energy, a key that unlocked a door in their minds. The world of stone and sky dissolved, and they were plunged into the vision. They saw the sky above Alola tear open. Not the beautiful, shimmering portals of light they remembered, but violent, screaming wounds in the fabric of reality. It was the climax of the Nihilego crisis, from a god's eye view. They felt the colossal expenditure of energy, the raw power Solgaleo and Lunala had used to force open the paths, to ferry them back and forth. It was a beacon, a lighthouse lit in a previously dark ocean. And something in the deep had seen the light. The vision shifted. They were floating in a dead, silent space. There were no stars. No galaxies. No light. Just an infinite, unending, absolute blackness. Below them was a world, but it was a planet of uniform, featureless gray. There were no mountains, no oceans, no clouds. It was a perfect sphere of nothing, a world that had been unmade, its story erased. The silence was a presence, a weight that crushed the soul. This was the Null's home. A universe with a dead heart. Then they saw it. A tide of that same nothingness, a cancer of entropy, bleeding out from its home dimension, drawn by the light of their reality. It wasn't a creature that attacked. It was an oil slick of silence spreading across a vibrant painting, bleaching the color, muting the sound, erasing the detail. It was not evil. It was simply, the end. The psychic onslaught was overwhelming. Lillie cried out, her hands flying to her head as the sheer, cosmic horror threatened to shatter her mind. Lusamine was on her knees, her scientific worldview dissolving in the face of this absolute, conceptual terror. All her life she had sought to control and perfect beauty. This was the ultimate anti-beauty, a force of pure, mindless erasure. It was everything she feared, magnified to a cosmic scale. She began to tremble, a low, guttural sound of pure terror escaping her lips. Her control was gone. She was broken. Just as the crushing apathy of the vision threatened to swallow them whole, a new sensation cut through the cold. A warmth. A light. Ash stood between them, his body radiating a soft, golden glow. His eyes were squeezed shut in concentration, but his hands were outstretched, not quite touching them. A shield of his aura, instinctually summoned, had flared to life around them. It wasn't a physical barrier. It was a sanctuary of warmth and resolve in the cold, dead heart of the vision. It felt like a hand on the shoulder, a promise whispered in the dark, the unshakable certainty that they were not alone. For Lillie, it was the familiar feeling of safety his presence had always given her, amplified 1,000 times. For Lusamine, it was a revelation. She was on her knees, terrified and broken, and the power she had once coveted as a weapon was now the only thing keeping her soul from being extinguished. She was feeling his strength not as a force to be owned, but as a shelter she had been freely given. Anchored by his light, they were able to withstand the final part of the vision. Salgalio's voice, a concept more than a sound, echoed in their minds. It unmakes. It erases. It silences. It cannot be fought with force, for it feeds on the energy of endings. It is a story of nothing. To fight it, you must tell a better story. A stronger story. A story of life. A legend is a story so strong, it becomes real. You must forge a new legend for the dawn. The vision shattered. They were back on the altar, the bright Alolan sun warm on their faces. The wind was blowing again. Lillie was gasping for air, leaning against Ash for support, her body trembling. Lusamine remained on her knees, her face pale, her eyes wide with the remembered terror of the starless sky. She was looking at her hands, as if to make sure they were still there. Ash, his own face beaded with sweat from the effort of holding the vision at bay, stepped forward and offered a hand to the fallen president. "We have our answer," he said, his voice quiet but firm. She stared at his hand for a long moment before taking it. His grip was warm, solid. Real. He pulled her to her feet. She did not immediately let go. Salgalio watched them, a deep understanding in its ancient eyes. It gave a final, low chuff, a promise and a farewell, before its body dissolved back into a shimmering point of light, which then vanished, leaving only the wind behind. The flight back was as quiet as the one before, but the silence was different. It was not the silence of tension, but of a shared, terrible burden. They were no longer three disparate individuals on a mission. They were survivors. They had stared into the abyss together, and it had forged a new, unspoken bond between them. Lusamine did not look at her datapad. She looked out the window, at the vibrant, living world below. And then, her gaze shifted, settling on Ash. She was no longer looking at a tool, or a champion, or a prospective consort. She was looking at the man who had built a sanctuary for her in the heart of oblivion. She was looking at their only hope. The sun's shadow was vast and terrifying, but for the first time, she felt they might just be able to bring the dawn. Chapter 5, The Siege of Paradise. The revelation from the altar of the sun had changed everything. The Ether Alliance was no longer just an investigative unit, it was the sole line of defense against a cosmic horror. The atmosphere in the war room, which had been one of controlled panic, had now settled into a grim, silent resolve. The enemy had a name, the Null, and a motive, to unmake their reality. The knowledge was terrifying, but it was also a weapon. Lusamine had been reborn in the crucible of Salgalio's vision. The cold, detached president and the broken, terrified woman had been burned away, leaving behind a leader forged in a new fire. The change was palpable. Her commands were still sharp, her logic still precise, but now there was a fierce, protective urgency to them. She moved through the command center not like a CEO inspecting her assets, but like a shield maiden defending her hull. Her paradise was under threat from a fundamental, existential level, and she would not let it fall. Lillie, too, had found a new clarity. The abstract data on her screens now had a face, the silent, starless sky of the Null's dimension. Her work was no longer about finding patterns, it was about holding back the tide. She coordinated sensor sweeps and drone deployments with a calm authority that belied her age, her voice a steady, reassuring presence in the ears of every operative in the field. But a new, cold dread had begun to settle over them. Ever since their communion with Salgalio, the Null had gone silent. The small, whispering energy drops had ceased. The map of Alola, for the first time in a week, was clear of red markers. "It's not gone," Gladion stated, his voice low, as he watched the clear map from the edge of the war room. "It's watching." Ash, who had been meditating in a quiet corner of the room with Pikachu, opened his eyes. "No," he said, rising to his feet. "It's not watching. It's aiming." His words sent a chill through the room. Lillie looked up from her console. "What do you mean?" "We went to the altar and called Salgalio," Ash explained, walking towards the central map. We looked into its home. We saw it. He stopped, his gaze sweeping over his allies. And in doing so, we showed it where we were looking from. We rang the dinner bell and told it exactly where the food was. As if on cue, a piercing klaxon blared through the war room. An analyst, his face pale, shouted, "Madam President. Proximity alert. Massive negative energy spike forming directly on top of us. It's everywhere." The main holographic map flickered and then dissolved into a maelstrom of red static. Every sensor on Ether Paradise was screaming at once. "All external communications are down," another analyst yelled. "We're cut off." It saw us, Lusamine breathed, her eyes wide with a horrifying understanding. It saw Ether Paradise as the heart of its opposition. The Null had learned. It had gone from random, opportunistic feeding to a strategic, targeted assault. It was laying siege to their fortress. The first wave was silent. Ether Paradise was not a single structure, but an artificial main island surrounded by a series of smaller, specialized habitat platforms connected by walkways. From the panoramic windows of the war room, they watched as a wave of gray washed over the outermost platform, Habitat C, the jungle biome. The vibrant greens of the trees faded to ash in seconds. The soundproof glass of the dome should have contained the roars and cries of the Pokémon within, but there were none. There was only the creeping, absolute silence. "Seal the access causeways from the outer habitats." Lusamine commanded, her voice ringing with authority. "Emergency blast doors, now. Isolate the main facility." Alarms blared as massive titanium doors slammed shut, severing the physical connections. But it was already too late. A new alert flashed on a secondary monitor. Energy readings from inside the dome. Faba cried, pointing a trembling finger. It's creating them. The echoes. Through the glass of Habitat C's dome, they saw movement. Shapes stirred in the gray, lifeless jungle. A herd of toros, their hides the color of dust, their eyes milky white voids, began to mindlessly slam their bodies against the interior of the dome. A toucan, its beak stripped of all color, flew at the glass, its silent impacts leaving spiderweb cracks. They were not trying to escape. They were trying to break in. Then, it grew worse. The water around the main island began to churn. From the depths, more shapes rose. Corrupted Ether Foundation security drones, their lights dead, their movements jerky and unnatural, began to scale the walls of the facility. They were joined by echoes of the aquatic Pokémon from the conservation areas, a silent, gray Gyarados, a vacuous Lapras, their eyes empty and dead. The siege of Paradise had begun. "It's using my own Pokémon against me," Lusamine whispered, a flicker of pure fury in her eyes. "My own technology. It's a coordinated attack," Gladion said, pulling his Pokeballs from his belt. Sylvie materialized beside him, its mechanical cry a defiant sound in the tense atmosphere. "It's trying to break through the lower levels." "It's not just trying to break in," Ash said, his gaze fixed on the swarming echoes. "It's trying to overwhelm us. To exhaust us." He turned, his eyes locking with Lusamine's. This was no longer a mission for a small field team. This was a war. "This is your fortress, President. Give the order." The moment hung in the air, a silent transfer of command. She was the strategist, the commander-in-chief. He was her sword. Lusamine's back straightened. The fury in her eyes cooled into a blade of ice. "All security personnel to battle stations. Faba, you are to protect the primary labs and the power core. Do not let them reach our energy source." She turned to her son. "Gladion, you know this facility better than anyone. Secure the residential wing. Get the civilian staff to the central panic room. That is your only priority." Gladion nodded, his expression grim. "And you?" "I command the battle from here," she said, turning to her console. Then she looked at Lillie, who was staring at the chaos with wide, terrified eyes. Lusamine's voice softened, just for a moment, a rare crack in her iron facade. "Lillie, stay with me. Your post is here." She was keeping her daughter by her side, not as a weakness to be protected, but as an essential part of the command structure. Finally, she looked at Ash. She didn't need to give him an order. Their eyes met, and the understanding was absolute. "I'll take the front line," Ash said. He turned to leave, Pikachu already on his shoulder, crackling with righteous fury. The main concourse of Ether Paradise, usually a pristine, sunlit atrium, was a battlefield. Echoes were pouring in through a breach in a lower-level observation deck, a tide of silent, gray monsters. Security teams were firing stun blasts from their rifles, but the energy attack seemed to do little more than make the echoes flicker. Ash arrived like a thunderbolt. "Lycanroc, Incineroar, let's go," he roared, throwing 2 pokeballs. His 2 Alolan powerhouses appeared, their vibrant colors a stark defiance to the gray tide. Incineroar let out a booming battle cry, and Lycanroc snarled, its eyes glowing with feral intensity. "Physical attacks only." Ash yelled to the security teams as he charged forward. "Don't waste your energy. Aim for the joints, throw them back." He was a whirlwind of motion, directing the defense, his voice cutting through the chaos. He wasn't just a trainer, he was a field general. A grayed-out Alolan Mook slithered toward him. "Incineroar, Flare Blitz." Incineroar became a spinning comet of fire, slamming into the echo. The creature didn't burn, but the sheer kinetic force sent it flying back into a wave of advancing drones, scattering them like bowling pins. A silent, skeletal Aerodactyl dove from a shattered skylight. Lycanroc, Stone Edge. Pillars of sharp rock erupted from the floor, not just striking the echo, but creating a barricade, a choke point to slow the advance. Ash was a master of battlefield control, his Pokémon's attacks serving dual purposes, to destroy and to shape the flow of battle. He moved with a brutal efficiency, a blur of action and command. He was everywhere at once, reinforcing a weak point, leading a charge, his presence a rallying cry for the beleaguered Ether staff. Over the comms, Lillie's voice was a lifeline of clarity in the storm. "Ash, heavy breach on the western flank. They're coming up through the ventilation shafts." "On my way," he yelled back. "Sceptile, you're up." Recalling a winded Incineroar, he sent out his Hoenn powerhouse. He raced towards the breach, Sceptile a green blur at his side. They met the new wave in a narrow maintenance corridor, a choke point perfect for Sceptile's speed. The battle was a dazzling, brutal ballet of Leaf Blade and Frenzy Plant, Sceptile's vines tearing through the empty husks of Rattata and Raticate echoes, holding the line single-handedly under Ash's expert command. Meanwhile, Gladion was a shadow of grim purpose in the residential wing. With Silvally and Crobat, he moved from room to room, herding terrified scientists and their families toward the safety of the central bunker. He fought with a cold, desperate efficiency, his attacks designed not to defeat, but to disable and clear a path. A wave of grayed-out Gumshoes blocked a corridor. He didn't stop to fight them. Silvally, Fire Memory, Flamethrower. The blast wasn't aimed at the echoes, but at the ceiling sprinklers above them. The water doused the creatures, their forms flickering and shorting out as the pure, life-filled water disrupted their empty shells. It was a brilliant, non-lethal solution that saved time and energy. In the war room, Lusamine was fighting a battle of her own. The Null wasn't just attacking physically, it was attacking her systems. The lights flickered. Screens went dead. "It's in the network," Faba reported, his voice tight with fear. "It's a parasitic code, eating our power grid from the inside." "Then we perform surgery," Lusamine said, her voice ice. Her fingers flew across her console. "Rerouting all non-essential power. I'm sacrificing the outer biomes. All of them." "Madam President," the Pokémon, Lillie started to protest. The Pokémon in those habitats are already gone, Lillie. Lusamine snapped, not with cruelty, but with the brutal pragmatism of a general making a battlefield triage. I am sacrificing limbs to save the heart. Now, give me a damage report. The siege raged for hours. Ash fought on the front lines, a seemingly inexhaustible well of stamina and power, his Pokémon rotating in and out as they tired, each one fighting with the heart of a champion. Gladion secured the last of the civilians, then joined the fight in the lower levels, his cold fury a perfect complement to Ash's fiery command. Lillie, from the war room, became their eyes and ears, predicting enemy movements, identifying structural weaknesses, and coordinating medical teams with a steady hand. She watched the icons representing Ash and her brother on the map, a constant prayer on her lips. Finally, the tide began to turn. Lusamine's gambit had worked. By sacrificing the outer sections of the paradise and rerouting all power to internal defenses and life support, she had starved the parasitic code. The swarms of echoes, their numbers thinned by the relentless defense, began to flicker and slow. Ash stood in the ravaged main concourse, surrounded by the husks of his fallen Pokémon, Incineroar, Lycanroc, Sceptile, all of them exhausted and recalled. Only Pikachu remained, swaying on his feet but still ready to fight. The final wave advanced, a dozen security drones and a towering, gray Snorlax. Pikachu, one last time, Ash said, his voice ragged. Pika. His partner nodded, exhausted but resolute. But before he could give the command, a voice echoed from the war room speakers, amplified throughout the facility. It was Lusamine. All personnel, brace for impact. With a deafening groan of tortured metal, the entire lower third of Ether Paradise's main structure was jettisoned. Emergency explosive bolts fired, and the compromised observation decks, breached corridors, and the swarming echoes on the exterior were simply dropped into the sea. Lusamine had performed radical surgery, amputating the infected portion of her station to save the rest. The remaining echoes, cut off from the main source of the null's influence, flickered and dissolved into dust. Silence descended. A real silence, this time. The only sounds were the groaning of stressed metal and the distant crash as the jettisoned section hit the ocean. They had won. Ash stood in the wreckage, breathing heavily. He recalled Pikachu, who had finally collapsed from exhaustion. The battle was over. He looked around at the destroyed concourse, the scorch marks, the power-down security teams, the dust of dissolved echoes. They had held the line. A short time later, he stood on the observation deck of the war room, looking out at the changed landscape. The outer habitats were dark and silent. The lower third of his home was gone. But the heart of Ether Paradise, the main dome, was still lit, a defiant beacon in the night. Gladion came to stand beside him, his arm in a makeshift sling. They didn't speak for a long moment, simply sharing the view of their costly victory. "She's ruthless," Gladion said, finally. "She's a survivor," Ash corrected, his voice quiet. The door opened, and Lusamine and Lillie approached. Lillie rushed to Gladion's side, her eyes filled with concern. Lusamine stopped next to Ash, her gaze also on the ruins of her paradise. "The lower levels are uninhabitable," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "Contaminated by residual negative energy. We can no longer stay here. Ether Paradise is compromised." They had won the battle, but in doing so, they had lost their fortress. They were adrift, a kingdom without a castle, the full might of their enemy now terrifyingly clear. It was intelligent. It was strategic. And it would be back. Chapter 6, Court in Exile. The sea was a vast, unforgiving blue. For 3 days, the remnants of the Ether Alliance had been a nomadic fleet, a ghost of their former power. The flagship, the Ether Foundation's premier oceanic research vessel the Laniakea, served as their new command center, its advanced laboratories and communication suites a pale imitation of the paradise they had abandoned. 2 smaller survey ships and a retrofitted cargo hauler trailed in its wake, carrying the essential personnel, equipment, and the few Pokémon they had managed to evacuate. They were a court in exile, their kingdom a contaminated ruin behind them, their future an uncertain horizon before them. The mood on board was somber. The victory at Ether Paradise had been a Pyrrhic one, and the cost was etched on every face. They had stared into the void and had been forced to sacrifice a piece of themselves to survive. Ash stood on the observation deck of the Laniakea, the sea spray cool on his face. The ceaseless motion of the ship, the endless expanse of water, it was a familiar comfort. He had spent much of his life in motion, but this felt different. He wasn't journeying toward a new challenge, he was running from a relentless shadow. Pikachu was on the railing beside him, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his small body a tense coil of energy. The battle had taken a toll on all his Pokémon, and though they were recovering, the memory of fighting empty, silent things lingered. The door to the deck slid open, and Lillie stepped out, carrying 2 steaming mugs. She had traded her pristine white dress for practical trousers and a sturdy jacket, the attire of a field researcher. The change was more than just cosmetic. The siege had stripped away the last vestiges of her timidity, tempering it into a quiet, resilient strength. She handed a mug to Ash. "Hot chocolate," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Wick said you haven't eaten." "Thanks," he said, accepting the warmth of the mug. They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, watching the waves. "It feels wrong," Lillie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Leaving it behind. Our home." "It was a fortress," Ash corrected gently. "And it fell. A home is something different." His gaze drifted over the small fleet behind them, the lights of the other ships like scattered stars on the dark water. "A home is the people you fight to protect." Lillie looked at him, at his calm profile against the darkening sky. He had a way of cutting through the chaos to the simplest, most profound truth. He didn't offer false hope or empty platitudes. He offered clarity. And in this swirling sea of uncertainty, clarity was an anchor. "My mother has been different since the battle," Lillie said, changing the subject. "Since the altar. She's still in command, but it's not just about control anymore. It's about responsibility." "She saw what was at stake," Ash said. "It's easy to be a president when all you're managing is success. It takes a leader to command a retreat." As if summoned, the door opened again. Lusamine emerged, her white suit immaculate as ever, but her face was etched with a weariness that no amount of pristine tailoring could conceal. She held a data pad, her expression grim. "We have a problem," she announced, her voice sharp, cutting through the quiet moment. "The world has noticed. The energy signatures from the siege, the jettisoning of a third of my facility, they were impossible to hide. Alola is no longer a regional crisis. We have an international audience." She turned the data pad around. On the screen was a live, encrypted video feed. A woman with long, blonde hair and a commanding presence stood in a stark, official-looking room, flanked by 2 men in sharp suits. The caption at the bottom of the screen read, "Cynthia, champion of the Sinnoh region. She has requested, demanded, a summit," Lusamine said, her voice tight with displeasure. "She is en route to Alola now, along with representatives from the Galar League's Macrocosmos and a special envoy from Unova." "A special envoy?" Gladion's voice came from the doorway. He had stepped out to join them, his arm now in a proper medical sling, his face a thunderous mask. "Let me guess. Dark suit, sunglasses, talks about ideals." Lusamine nodded grimly. "Someone from a reformed, and now officially sanctioned, Team Plasma. Their new mandate is the containment of anomalous Pokémon-related phenomena." "A god squad," Gladion spat. "They're not coming to help. They're coming to take over." "Worse," Ash said, his voice dangerously quiet. "They're coming for me." All eyes turned to him. "Think about it from their perspective," he explained, his gaze distant. "A mysterious, reality-eating force appears in Alola. The epicenter of the crisis is Ether Paradise, home to the recent Ultra Wormhole incidents. And who is standing right in the middle of it all? The same person who was there for the primal reversion in Hoenn, the dimensional rift in Kalos, the temporal crisis at Spear Pillar. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. I'm not a hero to them. I'm a lightning rod for Cataclysm. They're not coming here to fight the null. They're coming here to contain the variable they can actually see. The implications were chilling. They were fighting a war on two fronts, one against a cosmic entity of pure annihilation, and another against the political machinations of a world that was terrified of the power they wielded. The summit took place 2 days later in the only neutral, secure location left in Alola, the newly constructed conference hall of the Manalo Stadium. The air was thick with tension. On one side of a large, polished table sat the Ether Alliance, Lusamine, flanked by a defiant Lillie and a smoldering Glad Ion. Ash sat at the head of their delegation, a quiet, immovable object. On the other side sat the world. Cynthia was the clear leader, her presence radiating a calm, analytical authority that was almost as intimidating as Lusamine's. Beside her was a stern-faced man with a meticulously groomed mustache, introduced as Mr. Rose's personal attaché from Galar. And at the far end, a man in a black suit and sunglasses who had not yet spoken a word, the agent from the new Team Plasma. Let us be direct, Cynthia began, her voice smooth but with an edge of steel. She did not look at Lusamine, her gaze was fixed on Ash. Alola is experiencing a crisis of a magnitude not seen since the days of Primal Groudon in Kyogre. We have registered energy fluctuations that threaten the stability of the entire planet. Macrocosmos is concerned about the potential impact on the global energy supply. The Unnovan Council is concerned about the theological and existential ramifications. And I, her eyes narrowed slightly, am concerned that whenever a situation like this arises, you, Ash Ketchum, are at its heart. Correlation is not causation, champion, Lusamine interjected, her voice like ice. My region is under attack. We are handling it. With all due respect, Madam President, the Galar representative said, his tone condescending, your handling it involved jettisoning a sovereign territory's worth of advanced technology into the ocean and has resulted in the complete destabilization of Alola's energy grid. Our preliminary assessment suggests that the entity you call the null is drawn to large-scale energy expenditure. Such as the power source for your paradise. Or, he paused, letting the insinuation hang in the air, the unique bioenergy of a Z-move. Or the even more unique energy signature of a trainer capable of bond phenomenon. The accusation was clear. They were blaming him. Blaming his power. Before anyone from the Alliance could retort, Ash spoke. His voice was calm, cutting through the rising hostility. You're right, he said. The room fell silent. Even Cynthia looked taken aback. The null is drawn to energy, Ash continued, leaning forward slightly, his gaze sweeping over the international delegation. It was drawn here by the energy we used to save Lusamine. It's drawn to the Tapu, to Solgaleo. It's drawn to life. And yes, it's probably drawn to me. To my Pokémon. To the bonds we share. Because that bond is a form of energy. It's the strongest energy there is. He stood up, walking slowly around the table until he stood behind his own delegation, a protector watching over his people. You've come here with your concerns and your assessments. You've come here to contain a problem. But you haven't offered a single solution. You see a fire, and your first instinct is to blame the match, not to fight the blaze. He stopped, his gaze locking with Cynthia's. We have faced this thing. We have looked into its eyes. We know what it is. Do you? Cynthia held his gaze, her expression unreadable. We know that it represents an unacceptable threat. And you, Ash, represent an unacceptable variable. The World Council has authorized us to take command of this situation. Your Ether Alliance is to stand down and turn over all data. You will submit to a full evaluation in a secure facility until we can determine the extent of your involvement. It was a coup. A polite, politically sanctioned imprisonment. Glad-Ion shot to his feet, his hand instinctively going for a pokeball. You can't be serious. Lusamine rose slowly, her eyes burning with a cold fire. You dare to come to my region, while it is under siege, and attempt to strip us of our sovereignty? To imprison our champion? You will find that Alola does not yield so easily. The room was a powder keg. The Galar official was already speaking into his wrist comm, likely to the armed forces he undoubtedly had waiting offshore. The Unovan agent subtly shifted, his hand moving inside his jacket. But Ash was the calm at the center of the storm. He raised a hand, and both Glad-Ion and Lusamine quieted, looking to him. He was their field commander, and this was his field. There's only one way to settle this, Ash said, his voice resonating with a sudden, immense authority. He looked directly at Cynthia, a challenge in his eyes. You're a champion. I'm a champion. Let's stop talking. Let's battle. A one-on-one. Your ace against mine. If you win, Alola is yours. We'll stand down. I'll go with you. A murmur went through the room. It was a brash, reckless gamble. And if you win? Cynthia asked, her voice intrigued. If I win, Ash said, you leave. You give us the autonomy to fight our own war. You can observe, you can advise, but command stays with us. You will not interfere. It was a winner-take-all for the fate of Alola. The Galar official began to protest, but Cynthia silenced him with a glance. She stood up, a slow, dangerous smile playing on her lips. She was a battler, first and foremost, and this was a language she understood. The chance to test her mettle against the mythical champion of Alola, the boy who walked with gods, was too tempting to resist. I accept, she said. The battle took place on the main field of Manalo Stadium, the empty seats a silent audience to the clash of titans. It was Cynthia's Garchomp versus Ash's Pikachu. A battle of legends. The fight was breathtaking, a blur of motion and power that far exceeded the bounds of a normal Pokémon battle. Garchomp was a monster of speed and raw, draconic fury, its dragon rush a force that cracked the very ground. But Pikachu was something else entirely. He moved with a supernatural grace, a tiny golden comet weaving through a storm of destruction. He countered Garchomp's brute force with impossible speed and pinpoint-accurate iron tail strikes that deflected claws and redirected charges. The international delegation watched from a secure box, their expressions shifting from condescending certainty to slack-jawed awe. They were not watching a Pokémon battle. They were watching two forces of nature collide. Finally, both Pokémon were bruised, battered, and breathing heavily. Cynthia, a sheen of sweat on her brow, saw her opening. It's over. Garchomp, Draco Meteor. Garchomp roared, launching a sphere of orange energy into the sky. It exploded, and a dozen smaller meteors rained down, a blanket bombardment designed to be impossible to dodge. Ash didn't flinch. His bond with Pikachu was a visible thing, a current of energy between them. Pikachu, we're not dodging. We're going through it. Volt tackle. Pikachu became a sphere of crackling, golden electricity and shot forward, not away from the meteors, but at them. He slammed into the first, the impact creating a massive electrical detonation. He used the force of the explosion to propel himself toward the next, and the next, turning the Draco meteor shower into a pinball machine of his own creation, each impact making him faster, stronger, a living chain reaction of explosive power. He burst through the last meteor, a shooting star of pure voltage, and slammed directly into the stunned Garchomp. The resulting explosion of light and sound shook the entire stadium. When the dust settled, Garchomp lay unconscious. Pikachu stood over it, swaying but victorious. Ash had won. Cynthia stared at the field, her composure finally broken. She looked not at her defeated Pokémon, but at Ash, at the impossible bond he shared with his partner. She had sought to contain a variable. She had just learned that variable was a fundamental constant of the universe. She recalled Garchomp and walked onto the field, stopping in front of Ash. She extended her hand. "You have my word," she said, her voice filled with a new, profound respect. "Alola is yours to defend. We will not interfere." Later that evening, on the deck of the Laniakea, the mood was different. The victory had bought them time, had earned them the right to fight their own war. Ash, Lillie, and Lusamine stood together, watching the last light of day fade from the sky. The tension between them had finally, truly dissolved, replaced by the easy camaraderie of soldiers who had survived another battle. "It was an unnecessary risk," Lusamine said, though there was no heat in her words. Only a grudging admiration. "It was a necessary show of force," Ash corrected. "They needed to understand. We're not a problem to be managed. We're the only solution they have." Lillie looked from her mother to Ash. The alliance they had formed out of desperation had been tested by the world, and it had held. More than that, it had been solidified. The indecent proposal from that first day felt like a lifetime ago, a memory from a different world. It had been a desperate, ugly contract. This was different. This was a covenant, forged in battle and sealed with mutual respect. Lusamine looked at Ash, her gaze clear and direct. The possessive fire was gone, replaced by the steady light of a true ally. "My initial proposal was flawed. Born of trauma and a desire for control." She took a breath, the admission costing her a piece of her pride, but she gave it freely. "What I should have asked for was not a prince consort, but a partner." Lillie stepped forward, standing beside her mother, presenting a united front. She looked at Ash, her eyes shining with a quiet strength. "Stay," she said. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a demand. It was a simple, heartfelt request from an equal. "Stay with us. Help us rebuild. Help us fight." It was no longer about a reward. It was about a shared future. A choice, freely offered. Ash looked from the two women, the fierce, brilliant queen and the strong, resilient princess who had stood with him against the void, out to the sea. He had won the battle for Alola's autonomy. He had earned them their chance. But looking at them now, a rare, genuine smile touched his lips. He realized that somewhere along the way, in the heart of the chaos, he had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. He rested a hand on the ship's railing, the metal cool beneath his palm. A moment later, Lusamine placed her hand next to his. Then, Lillie placed hers beside her mother's. They weren't touching, but the message was clear. A silent, shared pact. A family, not of blood, but of battle. He had a home. Now, he just had to save it. Chapter 7, The Heart of Silence. The war room aboard the Laniakea was a bubble of focused silence, a stark contrast to the churning sea outside. The international delegation, true to Cynthia's word, had withdrawn to a support role, their formidable intelligence network now feeding data directly into Lillie's systems. The map of Alola was no longer a frantic rash of red alerts, but a complex, strategic overlay of energy grids, ley lines, and predictive models. They were no longer just tracking the null's attacks, they were mapping its soul. "It's a wound," Lillie said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. She pointed to a single, pulsing point on the holographic map. It was the summit of Mount Lanakila, the highest point in Alola, the very place where Ash had been crowned its first champion. The place where the League was born. All the minor incidents, the siege on Paradise, they were ancillary. Probes. Feints. This is the beachhead. A stable, weeping tear in the fabric of reality. It's the null's heart in our world. Faba, looking haggard but energized by the sheer volume of new data, adjusted his visor. Her assessment is correct. The negative energy readings from that location are constant, self-sustaining, and growing. It is no longer just a series of incursions. It has established a permanent anchor point. Glad-Ion, his arm now free of its sling, leaned over the table, his expression grim. So we hit it. A full-scale assault. Solgaleo, the Tapu, every Pokemon we have. We blast that tear with enough power to close it for good. No, Ash said, his voice cutting through the rising tide of aggressive strategy. He had been staring at the pulsing red light on the map, his eyes distant, as if seeing beyond the data to the truth of it. Solgaleo's words. It feeds on the energy of endings. A massive battle, a huge explosion of power, that's not an attack. That's a feast. We'd be pouring gasoline on a fire. Then what do we do? Lusamine asked, stepping forward. She trusted his instincts now, implicitly. Her gaze was fixed on the map, on the wound festering at the peak of her tallest mountain. We cannot allow it to fester. We can't attack it from the outside, Ash said, his gaze finally lifting to meet theirs. A quiet, terrifying resolve had settled over him. So we have to go inside. We have to cut the heart out from within. A stunned silence fell over the room. Faba began to stammer, go, inside. Commander, the physics of such a place would be, theoretical at best. Suicidal at worst. It's the only way, Ash stated, his finality leaving no room for debate. He was not asking for opinions. He was declaring their next move. The null erases things. It unmakes them. We can't destroy the tear, so we have to give it something to unmake that it can't handle. We have to seal it from the inside out. He looked at Glad-Ion, then Lillie, then Lusamine. He wasn't ordering them. He was seeing who would stand with him. Glad-Ion met his gaze, a grim, determined fire in his eyes. I'm with you. Lillie took a deep breath, her hand resting on the pokeball that held Snowy. She looked terrified, but resolute. To the end. Lusamine stepped forward, her expression a mixture of the fear she felt and the iron will she projected. She had followed him to the altar. She would follow him into the abyss. The Ether Alliance does not abandon its field commander. It was decided. The ascent of Mount Lanakila was a pilgrimage into the heart of the creeping silence. The lower slopes were still vibrant, teeming with the life and sound of Alola. But as they climbed higher, the world began to fade. The first to go was the birdsong. Then, the rustle of wind through the trees quieted. The vibrant greens of the foliage bled into muted shades of olive and gray. The air grew cold, still, and heavy, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. They were a small, determined party against the encroaching stillness. Ash led the way, Pikachu on his shoulder, a small, defiant spark of gold in the fading world. Lillie and Glad-Ion walked behind him, their Pokemon, Snowy and Silvery, out of their pokeballs, their presence a small comfort against the oppressive quiet. Lusamine followed at the rear, her usual immaculate suit now covered by a heavy-duty, insulated parka, her face a mask of cold resolve. The air pressure is stable, she reported, her voice unnaturally loud in the silence as she checked a device on her wrist. Oxygen levels are normal. But my instruments are detecting a subtle psychometric distortion. It's attacking our perception of reality. As if to prove her point, Lillie stumbled, catching herself on a gray boulder. The path, she whispered. I thought it was wider. Ash stopped and looked back. The path they had just walked was narrower than he remembered, the edges seeming to fray into nothingness. The null wasn't just erasing life, it was rewriting the world behind them. They pressed on, the silence growing deeper, heavier. It was a physical weight now, a pressure that made their heads ache and their thoughts feel sluggish. They reached the summit, the site of the Alolan League, and the sight that awaited them stole the breath from their lungs. The stadium was gone. The grand arches, the battlefield, the spectator stands, all of it had been unmade. In its place was a scene of surreal horror. The ground was a flat, featureless expanse of gray dust. The sky above was a swirling vortex of black and violet, the colors of ultra-space, but sickled and wrong. And in the center of the plateau, where the champion's dais once stood, was the wound. It was a perfect sphere of absolute blackness, roughly 20 feet in diameter, hovering a few feet above the ground. It did not reflect light. It consumed it. It radiated a cold that had nothing to do with temperature, a soul-deep chill that spoke of ultimate endings. The air around it shimmered and warped, reality bending around its impossible presence. This was the Null's heart. "Faba, do you have a reading?" Lusamine's voice was a strained whisper into her calm. Faba's voice came back, tinny and terrified. "It's pure negative energy. A singularity of anti-existence. To enter it is to cease to be." Ash walked toward the sphere, his steps slow and deliberate on the gray dust. He could feel it now, a siren song of apathy washing over him. "It's so tiring. Why fight? Let go. Join the silence. It is so peaceful." Pikachu. Pikachu's cry was a sharp bolt of defiance, his cheeks sparking, cutting through the psychic haze. The bond between them, the story they shared, was an anchor against the tide of nothingness. Ash stopped a few feet from the sphere. He turned to the others. "This is as far as you go." No," Lillie said, stepping forward to stand beside him. Snowy was at her feet, a tiny, trembling ball of white fur, but it did not back down. "We started this together. We finish it together." Gladion took his place on Ash's other side, silverly planting its feet with a metallic clang. "You said it yourself. A home is the people you protect. We're not letting you do this alone." Lusamine joined them, completing the circle. She looked at the sphere of blackness, the source of a terror that had broken her, and her face was set with a terrible, beautiful defiance. The Ether Alliance does not break ranks. Ash looked at them, at this strange, broken, and utterly loyal family that had formed around him. He gave a small, grim smile. He had never felt less alone in his life. "All right," he said. "Together." He reached out and placed his hand into the sphere. There was no sensation of heat or cold, no physical resistance. There was only a sudden, violent wrenching, as if his soul was being torn from his body. The world dissolved, and they fell into the heart of silence. They did not land. They simply were. They were in a place that was not a place, a dimension of swirling gray fog, where the laws of physics were a half-forgotten dream. There was no ground, no sky, only an infinite, featureless gray in all directions. The oppressive silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic beating of their own hearts. And they were alone. The moment they entered, the Null had separated them, isolating each one in a personalized prison of the mind. Lusamine found herself back in the crystalline heart of ultra-space. But it was not the nightmarish landscape she had escaped. It was beautiful. The crystals pulsed with a soft, gentle light. And before her, a Nihilego floated. It did not try to possess her. It simply drifted, its tentacles trailing like silk, its bell chiming with a soft, melodic sound. "You were so happy here," a voice whispered in her mind. It was her own voice, but calm, content. There was no chaos. No failure. No disappointing children. Just perfection. Just us. We can be beautiful again. Just let go. The Nihilego drifted closer, its form shimmering. For a moment, it took the shape of a younger Lillie, smiling, holding out her hand. Lusamine felt a powerful, overwhelming urge to reach out, to accept the perfect, painless beauty it offered. To become one with it again. Lillie was in the cold, sterile laboratories of Ether Paradise, but not the command center she had claimed as her own. She was in the hidden sublevels, the place of her childhood nightmares. She was small again, a child in a simple white dress. All around her, in containment cells, were Pokémon. A Vulpix, a Clefairy, a Cutiefly. They stared at her with wide, pleading eyes. She tried to reach out, to open the cages, but her hands wouldn't move. She tried to touch them, but an invisible wall stopped her, her fingers pressing against a cold, unyielding barrier. You see. A voice, her own but filled with a chilling self-pity, whispered around her. You can't help them. You're too scared. You'll always be too scared. You can't even touch them. You are a cage. You break everything you try to love. She looked down at her hands and saw they were made of glass. Fragile. Empty. She curled into a ball, the terror of her past a crushing weight, convinced she was, and always would be, the girl who was afraid. Glad Ion stood in a perfect replica of his father's study on Ether Paradise. It was a room he had not seen in years, a place lost to the chaos of his mother's obsession. Books lined the walls, and the air smelled of old paper and ozone. And sitting behind the desk, looking not a day older than the day he vanished, was Moan. He wasn't a ghost. He looked solid, real. He smiled, but it was a sad, disappointed smile. I trusted you, son, Moan said, his voice filled with a gentle, soul-crushing sorrow. I trusted you to protect them. To protect your mother, your sister. But you ran. You left Lillie to suffer. You let your mother fall into darkness. You were so focused on becoming strong, you forgot to be a brother. You failed. A phantom type, Null, its helmet cracked, its eyes filled with pain, appeared beside the desk, a living symbol of Gladion's guilt. He clenched his fists, the weight of his past failures a physical burden, the accusation from the man he revered most shattering his stoic resolve. Ash was confronted by something else entirely. He was not shown a past failure or a hidden fear. He was shown nothing. He stood in a perfect replica of Professor Oak's lab in Pallet Town. The sun was streaming through the windows. His mother was there, placing a plate of cookies on the table. Professor Oak was laughing at a joke. Gary was leaning against a wall, a familiar, arrogant smirk on his face. Misty and Brock were bickering good-naturedly in a corner. But their eyes were blank. He ran to his mother. Mom. She didn't turn. She just kept humming, her movements rote and empty. He waved a hand in front of Professor Oak's face. Nothing. He shouted at Gary, who didn't even flicker. He looked at Pikachu, who was sitting on the table, nibbling a cookie. Pikachu. Buddy? Pikachu turned its head. Its eyes were vacant. It let out a small, questioning Pika, but the sound was empty, a recording. There was no recognition. No bond. No story. He ran outside, to the corral. His Pokémon were there. Charizard, Sceptile, Greninja, all of them. They grazed peacefully, ignoring him completely. It was as if he was a ghost. As if he had never existed. See? A voice whispered. It was not his voice. It was the cold, flat voice of the Null itself. This is the ultimate truth. In the end, all stories fade. All bonds break. All memory is erased. You leave no mark. You are nothing. Your legend is a lie. The apathy washed over him, colder and stronger than anything he had ever felt. The pointlessness of it all. The struggle, the battles, the friendships, all of it, just a flicker of light before an eternity of silence. His strength, his will, his very identity began to unravel. He sank to his knees, the golden light of his aura flickering, fading. The Null was winning. It was unmaking him from the inside out. His hand brushed against the cool metal of a poke ball on his belt. A single, desperate, instinctual thought cut through the fog of despair. Not a memory. Not a strategy. Just a name. A story. The first chapter. His voice was a ragged croak. A whisper of defiance against an ocean of silence. Pikachu. The word was a stone tossed into a still pond. His vision of the empty lab rippled. He said it again, louder this time, pouring every ounce of his remaining will into it. Pikachu. The bond. The one constant in his entire life. The promise made on that first, stormy day. The shared victories. The shared defeats. The story that had defined him. It was a force the Null could not understand. A legend of two souls that refused to be silenced. His aura flared back to life, a supernova of golden light that shattered the illusion of pallid town. He was back in the gray fog, the apathy receding, replaced by a cold, burning rage. He was not nothing. He was Ash Ketchum. And this thing had hurt his friends. He reached out with his senses, not with his eyes. He followed the faint, terrified heartbeats, the flickering lights of his friends' souls in the oppressive darkness. He found Lusamine first, reaching for the phantom Lillie. Ash's presence was a jolt of reality. That's not her, he roared in her mind. The real Lillie is fighting with us. The one who stood up to you. The one who stood beside you. Remember her. The vision of the beautiful, compliant child shattered, replaced by the memory of Lillie on the deck of the ship, strong and defiant. The Nihilego shrieked and dissolved. He found Lillie, curled in her glass prison. He didn't offer her pity. He offered her strength. You are not the girl who is afraid. You are the one who crossed the bridge. You are the one who healed Nebi. You are the head of analysis for the Ether Alliance. You are not a cage. You are a warrior. Now, break it. Lillie looked up, her eyes blazing. She slammed her fist against the invisible wall, not with glass, but with flesh and bone and will, and her prison shattered. He found Glad Ion, paralyzed by his father's disappointment. Your father is gone. Ash's voice was a brutal, cleansing fire. His memory is a weight. Let it go. Your family needs you now. Your sister needs you. Your mother needs you. You're not a failure. You're her shield. You're his son. Be the man he would have wanted you to be. Glad Ion looked up, the guilt in his eyes replaced by a burning resolve. The phantom of his father faded into dust. One by one, he pulled them from their nightmares, his voice a beacon of pure, unshakable truth. They reformed in the gray fog, no longer alone, but a tight, defiant circle. They were shaken, pale, but their eyes were clear. They had faced their inner demons and, with his help, they had won. What now? Lusamine asked, her voice trembling but firm. Ash looked into the swirling gray mist. His rage had cooled into a perfect, cold clarity. He could feel it now. The source of it all. The heart of the heart. Now, he said, his voice a low growl of promise. We end this. He began to walk, and they followed, a small band of flickering lights moving purposefully through an infinite, silent darkness, heading towards a final confrontation in the heart of the void. Chapter 8, A Legend for the Dawn. The gray fog thinned, the oppressive silence solidifying into a profound, expectant stillness. They walked out of the mist and into a space that defied reason. It was a cathedral of nothingness, a vast, spherical chamber whose walls were the same swirling, starless black Ash had seen in the wormhole. There was no up or down, only a single, floating platform of gray, featureless stone beneath their feet. And in the center of the chamber, suspended in the void, was the core. It was a perfect sphere of absolute blackness, larger and more potent than the wound they had entered on Mount Lanakila. This was the source. It did not radiate energy, it absorbed it, a hole in the universe that bled silence. The psychic apathy washed off it in palpable waves, a constant, wearying whisper of pointlessness. All this effort. For what? To delay the inevitable. All stories end. All lights go out. Surrender. Be still. So that's it, Glad Ion breathed, his hand tightening on a pokeball. The heart of the beast. We can't attack it, Lillie said, her voice shaking but her mind sharp. She remembered Solgalio's warning. It will just feed on the energy. Lusamine stared at the core, her scientist's mind trying to comprehend a thing that was, by its very nature, incomprehensible. It's a conceptual entity. A living paradox. How do you fight an idea? Ash didn't answer. He was looking at the core, but his gaze was inward. He was replaying Solgalio's words, not as a warning, but as an instruction manual. It is a story of nothing. To fight it, you must tell a better story. A stronger story. A legend is a story so strong, it becomes real. He finally understood. It wasn't a riddle. It was a strategy. He smiled, a fierce, brilliant, and utterly confident grin that seemed blasphemously bright in this dead place. You don't fight an idea with fists, he said, his voice ringing with a newfound, joyful power. You fight it with a better idea. He turned to them, his eyes blazing with a light that pushed back the darkness. We're not going to attack it. We're not going to try and destroy it. He unclipped all 6 of his pokeballs from his belt. We're going to put on a show. Before they could question him, he threw the pokeballs into the air. Everyone, come on out. Pikachu, Sceptile, Greninja, Incineroar, Lycanroc, and his mighty Charizard materialized on the stone platform, a sudden, shocking explosion of color and life in the gray, dead space. They were tired, still bearing the marks of the siege, but at their trainer's call, they stood tall, their combined presence a defiant roar of existence against the silence. What are you doing? Lillie asked, bewildered. I'm telling a story, Ash said, his grin widening. He pointed at the silent, watching core. It wants an ending. We'll give it one. And a beginning. And a middle. He looked at his oldest friend. Pikachu, you and me, like that first day. Thunderbolt. Pikachu, understanding instantly, leaped into the air and unleashed a massive, brilliant bolt of lightning, not at the core, but into the empty space above them, a golden crack of defiance that illuminated the entire chamber. Charizard, flamethrower. Ash commanded. Charizard roared, a real, guttural sound of power, and spewed a torrent of vibrant orange flame that danced and swirled with the lightning, a chaotic, beautiful ballet of energy. Sceptile, leaf storm. Greninja, water shuriken. A vortex of emerald green leaves and a fusillade of crystalline blue stars of water joined the maelstrom, weaving together into a tapestry of light, color, and sound. It was not an attack. It was a performance. A symphony of life. Lillie, Gladion, and Lusamine watched, stunned into silence. Ash wasn't fighting. He was, celebrating. He was reenacting the very essence of a Pokémon battle, the core of his entire journey. Don't just stand there. Ash yelled over the glorious chaos, a joyous laugh in his voice. Join in. What's your story? The invitation, the sheer, insane audacity of it, broke their paralysis. Gladion was the first to react. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. He understood. This was a language he knew. He pulled out his own pokeballs. Silvally. Crobat. Zoroark. Let's show them what we've got. His Pokémon appeared, adding their own power to the performance. Silvally's multi-attack became a cascade of shifting, multicolored light. Crobat's air slash was a series of graceful, silver arcs. Zoroark's illusions created phantoms of their greatest opponents, a spectral Tapu Koko, a shadowy Necrozma, not as threats, but as dance partners in their grand legend. Lillie looked at the beautiful, defiant chaos, then at Snowy, who was looking up at her, its eyes bright. Her story. It wasn't one of grand battles, but it was hers. Snowy, use powder snow, she cried, her voice clear and strong. A delicate, glittering cloud of ice crystals filled the air, not as an attack, but as a backdrop, a stage of shimmering diamond dust upon which the other Pokémon performed. She added her own quiet beauty to their roaring symphony. The null core pulsed. The apathy it radiated intensified, trying to quell the riot of life and energy. Cease. Be silent. It is meaningless. Don't you get it yet? Ash shouted at the sphere, his voice filled with triumphant glee. This is the meaning. The struggle, the bond, the fight. It's everything. The performance grew more intense. Ash had his Pokémon battle each other, not with malice, but with the familiar fire of 1,000 training sessions. Pikachu vs. Lycanroc, a dance of speed and power. Greninja and Sceptile, a high-speed ballet of blade and shuriken. Incineroar and Charizard, a titanic, fiery spectacle. They were reenacting their league battles, their frontier triumphs, their island challenges. They were telling the story of Ash Ketchum, not in words, but in pure, unadulterated action. And then, Lusamine acted. She ran to the edge of the stone platform where the grey fog of the entrance still swirled. She plunged her hands into it, her comm device activated. Faba. Do you read me? Faba, answer me. His terrified voice crackled back. Madam President. You're alive. The readings are insane. Faba, listen to me, she commanded, her voice a blade of perfect, cold authority. I want all remaining power from the Ether Fleet. From the Manalo Stadium grid. From every power plant in Alola that Cynthia's people can commandeer. I want all of it. And I want you to channel it through the rift. Channel it? But Madam President, the energy feedback could destroy the generators. And for what purpose? As a weapon? Not as a weapon, you fool. Lusamine roared, a wild, brilliant fire in her eyes. She was no longer a scientist or a president. She was a producer, a director, a patron of the arts. As a spotlight. On the outside, on the windswept peak of Mount Lanakila, Faba, with the frantic help of Cynthia's technicians, scrambled to obey. They rerouted gigawatts of power, not into a focused beam, but into a raw, unfiltered surge. Back inside the core, the rift in the fog began to glow. A beam of pure, unfiltered Alolan sunlight, a torrent of raw, life-filled electrical energy, poured into the chamber of darkness. It wasn't an attack. It was stage lighting. It illuminated the swirling, vibrant chaos of the battle, turning the performance into a legend being written in real time. The null core shuddered. It was an entity of silence and endings, of creeping, silent erasure. It had no defense against this. It was like trying to drown a symphony in a cup of water. The sheer, overwhelming story of it all, the vibrant, defiant, illogical joy of life, of struggle, of bonds, it was a concept alien to its entire existence. The light and energy didn't destroy it, they repelled it, pushing it back, overwhelming its very nature. Ash saw his moment. The performance had weakened it, the light had blinded it. Now, it was time for the final act. He raised his arm, his Zeering blazing to life, not just with his own power, but with the borrowed energy of the Alolan sun pouring through the rift. Lillie, Gladion, and Lusamine all felt a resonance, their own latent Z-power being drawn out, offered up to him. He was a conduit for all of them, for all of Alola. Pikachu, he roared, his voice the crescendo of their symphony. This is our story. Let's give it the ending it deserves. He began the motions, the familiar dance now imbued with a sacred, cosmic weight. Every trainer, every Pokémon in Alola felt it, a surge of power, a call to hope. 10 million. Volt. Thunderbolt. It was not a bolt of lightning. It was a sun. A rainbow-hued nova of pure, concentrated life, story, and bond, the ultimate expression of his entire journey. It was the love for his mother, the respect for his rivals, the bond with every Pokémon he had ever met, all focused into a single, overwhelming declaration of existence. The nova did not strike the core. It engulfed it. The null, a creature of nothing, was drowned in a sea of everything. It did not scream. It did not explode. It simply retreated. The sphere of blackness imploded, shrinking in on itself, unable to bear the sheer, vibrant reality of the attack. It was pushed back through the tear in spacetime it had created, banished from their world by a story too loud, too bright, too strong to be erased. The moment the core vanished, the chamber began to collapse. The black walls cracked, revealing the raw, chaotic energy of ultra-space beyond. The stone platform crumbled. "We have to go. Now!" Gladion yelled. Ash, drained but resolute, recalled his Pokémon. Lusamine grabbed Lillie's hand, and the four of them ran, sprinting for the glowing rift as the dimension tore itself apart behind them. They dove through the light just as the heart of silence collapsed into nothing. They tumbled out onto the summit of Mount Lanakila, gasping, into the cold, clean air of the dawn. The gray dust was gone. The sky was a clear, crisp blue, the first rays of the rising sun cresting the horizon. The silence was broken by the frantic cries of the wind gull, the rush of the wind, the sound of a world coming back to life. The wound was healed. Weeks later, the observation deck of a rebuilt and revitalized ether paradise was bathed in the warm light of the Alolan sun. The facility was different now. The cold, sterile white had been softened with woods and greens. The conservation areas were open, integrated, no longer just exhibits but part of a living, breathing whole. It was less a fortress, more a home. Ash stood at the railing, looking out at the peaceful blue sea. The world leaders had departed, their reports filled with accounts of a battle that defied explanation, their awe and terror palpable. Alola was safe, its sovereignty secured not by politics, but by a legend. The door slid open, and Lusamine and Lillie approached. They came to stand on either side of him, not as a president and her daughter, but as partners. Equals. "The foundation is stable," Lusamine said, her voice softer than it had ever been, filled with a quiet contentment. "The last of the null's energetic residue has dissipated. We're beginning again." She looked at him, her green eyes clear and filled with a profound, humble gratitude. "The offer still stands, Ash. Not a contract. Not a reward. But a partnership. In rebuilding this foundation, in protecting this region. As a member of this family." Lillie looked at him, her own eyes shining. The timid girl was gone forever, replaced by a confident, capable woman who had walked through the heart of oblivion and come out stronger. "She's right," Lillie said. "Your journey, your search for battles, maybe it doesn't have to be a journey away from something. Maybe it can be a journey back. To us." It was not an indecent proposal. It was an invitation. To stop wandering. To build something. To stay. Ash looked from the fierce, brilliant woman who had sacrificed her paradise to save her people, to the strong, gentle woman who had faced down her deepest fears to stand with him. He thought of the battles, the terror, the impossible victory they had forged together. He thought of Solgalio's words. Forge a new legend for the dawn. He had ended another world-ending threat. He had won another impossible battle. But for the first time, the end of the adventure didn't feel like an ending at all. It felt like a beginning. He looked out at the rising sun over Alola, and a genuine, warm smile spread across his face. He reached out, not to the side, but behind him, an open gesture. Lily's hand found his first, her fingers lacing with his. Then Lusamine's hand gently covered both of theirs. A legend for the dawn. It wasn't just a story you told. It was a life you lived. And his was just getting started. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.